know the wisdom of the elders. We feel the restlessness of youth. We hear the thunder of the lies. We hold aloft the light of truth. We raise the banner of our union. We lift our voices to the skies. This is the future, sisters and brothers. Come unite and organize. Power, there is power in a union. Power, there is power in our hands. Power, we stand and fight together. There is power in a union of many lands. Power, come and reach across the borders. Power, come and open up your eyes. Power, we stand and fight together. Power when we organize. Power, we stand and fight together. There is power when we organize. Power, when we stand and fight together. There is power when we organize.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. 10 years on from the Hurricane Katrina disaster, social justice groups are still working in the Gulf region to overcome decades of social and economic injustice. Martha Bergmark of the Mississippi Center for Justice reflects on the hurricane and the social justice struggle that occurred in its wake.
Hard to really imagine, in a way, just how cataclysmic it was, and yet it was an event that really peeled back the layers on social justice problems that have plagued our region forever. In trying to recover from this terrible disaster, we had an opportunity to try to do it in a way that was more equitable, more fair to some of the hurricane's most vulnerable survivors. So 10 years later, we see a region that has recovered in many ways, I think because of the work of civil legal aid and social justice partners across the region. And yet we did not change the underlying reality that, hundreds of years of well-entrenched policy and practice have put in place. We still are a region that is our nation's poorest, where folks at the bottom of the ladder have the biggest struggles.
Bergmark says that the civil legal aid she mentioned is critical for poor and working people if they are to get social and economic justice.
If folks at the bottom of the economic spectrum can't have access to legal help, just right there along with all the other sort of first response kind of needs that have to be met, there just needs to be a recognition that legal help is first and foremost, it's near the top of the list.
The Bank of Labor is raising wages, joining the AFL-CIO effort to put more money in workers' pockets. The Bank of Labor says it's setting a minimum wage of $15 an hour for its employees. Bank of Labor is based in Kansas City, Kansas, and has an office in Washington, D.C. Workers there are members of the United Mine Workers. The bank and the UMWA both embraced the AFL-CIO call to raise wages. The Bank of Labor was founded and is majority-owned by the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, iron ship builders, blacksmiths, forgers, and helpers. Bank of Labor CEO Newton Jones says that the AFL-CIO's Raising Wages campaign benefits all workers, union and non-union alike, by setting a standard to which all employers should aspire. Through such initiatives, he says, we can help restore the middle class. Workers Independent News is made possible in part through underwriting support from OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. If you like this labor news, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and visit us at laborradio.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
stay long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this time is my time. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about as we are back live in the studio. Yes, back off the road from the People's Tour. And what an amazing trip it was. I have to be honest, my wild expectations were met. We talked to people all across the South, heard stories that were incredible, amazing, uplifting, and heartbreaking all at the same time. And you can check out all of those interviews at thericksmithshow.com. The entire trip right there, everything in a neat little package, pictures, also the interviews right there. Anyway, today, the big program, lots on the agenda. Today, the day that Hurricane Katrina hit a decade ago, right? Wow. You think about that for a minute. 10 years have gone by, and we were just in New Orleans. And I'll tell you, we were there like eight and a half years ago. I think it was almost 9, actually. The devastation that we saw, the destruction that we saw, the buildings just washed away, the piles of trash, all of that. The wealthy areas have been rebuilt. The moneyed interest, really well taken care of. The places where poor people lived, where working people lived, not so much. Lots of green space now, lots of open spaces, open fields where people used to have had homes. And as our friend Dana Colombo took us through the area, as he had done the last time we were in New Orleans, you could see where the money was spent. You could see that for some, New Orleans is back. But for others, not so much. And to be honest, a good number of the people aren't even there. And you look at that op-ed that the woman at the Chicago Tribune put out saying, we want our Hurricane Katrina because we could get rid of our poor people in Chicago. And of course, those teachers and their unions. And I guess it's not surprising to me that when George Bush returned back to New Orleans, he went back to one of, the oldest public school at the time there in New Orleans that is now a charter school, to tout how wonderful things have become, how wonderful his reforms, how wonderful everything is. And I'll tell you, what's happened to that system, that education system there in New Orleans, is the game plan for the nation. Take advantage of a good crisis. Even if you did everything you could possibly do to make sure that it didn't turn around fast enough, and then you privatize and profitize, which is what they did to that education system. And we had gone by a couple of schools, but one in particular stuck out in my mind. It was this Catholic school, which I thought was a university. Actually thought it was a Catholic university. It was a high school, but the best facilities you'll ever see. And here's the reality, that you could live right next door to that school and not get in. All built with public money. Not all, but a lot of public money went into it. Which means that we're funding Catholic schools, which is the goal in all of this. The goal in all of this is to take public money, our money, yours and mine, and put it into the hands of the different religions and the different profiteers so that they're able to, enrich themselves and control society. So I find it interesting that today, the 10th anniversary, you've got Bush running around. I guess he was in New Orleans. Now he was in Mississippi as well with his buddy Haley Babar. And they're saying how wonderful they did and how wonderful everything has turned out. But you know what? I seem to remember 10 years ago, and I remember 9 years ago and 8 years ago. And oh, I was just there. Things are not wonderful. And what's frustrating to me is as we move further and further away from it, the pain, the suffering, all of the images, they go from our mind. So when you look at this anniversary, when you look at the 10th anniversary of this disaster and the lack of preparedness, and a little bit later we'll talk about the heck of a job Brownie, because he's out doing a PR campaign to try and clear himself. It all falls squarely on the shoulders of the Bush administration and the governor of Louisiana and Ray Nagin. They are all to blame in my view. But at the end of the day, you could say, it was Nagin's fault that the people didn't get out and there was a big Super Bowl. At the end of the day, it's still FEMA's responsibility to get in there and do their job. And what they didn't do right away was get in there and do their job. So a lot of that to get to, a lot of stuff going on. I'm happy to be back in the studio. Looking forward to the budget fight that is still going on, or maybe it's not. I don't know if the budget is actually being fought over at this point. There was a little stunt, I guess, earlier in the week. We'll get to, but you got state reps out doing radio shows, not doing his job, going filling in for others, doing other people's work. I got to be honest. I wish I could get a couple of them to come do a couple of days of free labor for me as well. Maybe they can build the shed I need built. Put them to some useful work instead of the nonsense that they've been pulling. And we'll talk to that. Also, some interesting news coming out of Pittsburgh over the ATI lockout. Also, steel across the country, potential trouble there, and a huge victory for working people here in the country as the NLRB made probably the most important labor decision yesterday that's been made in the last, since Reagan. Since Reagan declared war on workers, this is probably the most important decision. And I think it's important that we get to it and talk about it. Lots of stuff, though. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your comments. Back in the studio, you can give us a call here, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Going to take a quick break. Right back here from The Rick Smith Show. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
When the Saints come marching in, when the Saints come marching in, I wanna be in that number, yes. Now here comes Papa Jack with his banjo.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1963. That was the day of one of the most iconic stands for justice and equality in United States history. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech to 250,000 people in Washington, D.C. But did you know the official title for that history-making event was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom? The popular memory of the March on Washington focuses on the fight for freedom, especially the right for Black Americans to access public spaces and the voting booth. But the march organizers also understood that economic justice was a fundamental part of this broader call for freedom. As Dr. King once famously asked, "What good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger?" This emphasis on the importance of jobs and economic justice perhaps was most represented by A. Philip Randolph. He was one of the lead organizers of the 1963 March on Washington. Randolph was the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the nation's first national African-American union. Starting in World War I, Randolph fought for an end to employment discrimination. His efforts in planning the March on Washington were an extension of that earlier work. Organized labor had a mixed response to the march. The AFL-CIO did not endorse the march. Walter Reuther, head of the United Auto Workers, shared the stage in Washington, D.C. with Dr. King and A. Philip Randolph that day. It is important to remember the connection between the call for civil rights and the demand for the right to employment, fair wages, and dignity at the workplace. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. Conservative media have been cheering Donald Trump for his treatment of one of the country's top Hispanic journalists, Jorge Ramos, who was thrown out of one of Trump's press conferences. During an appearance on CNN's New Day, CNN political commentator Jeffrey Lord connected Jorge Ramos to mass shooters in Virginia and Charleston. Let's take a listen.
And aside from that, he was into a race war and a reaction, which he mentioned, of the Charleston shooting. And that guy was motivated by race. So I'm suggesting here that instead of dividing the country by race, which is what we seem to do, which is what, for instance, Jorge Ramos was all about in that press conference. It's all about the race of people. We shouldn't be going down that path. This is a colorblind country. That was Dr. King's goal. That's where we should be headed. And I think that is something that we should be discussing, as well as mental illness and guns.
Despite his history of pushing fringe rhetoric and misinformation, CNN hired Lord as a CNN political commentator earlier this month. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Now it's time to clear the way for a series of trade agreements. You can trust me.
From the Monongahela Valley to the Mesabi Iron Range, the coal mines of Appalachia, the story's always the same. 700 tons of metal a day. Now, sir, you tell me the world's changed. Once I made you rich enough to forget my name. Been young as 10.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, every time I hear the president say, trust me on those, I sat 20 feet from him when he said that. Trust me on those trade deals. I now think, you know, we've already passed the Colombia, the Chorus, the Panama, and now they're talking about the mother of all free trade agreements, this Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade agreement. And, you know, I've had some folks go, you know, why is Donald Trump doing so well? And I go, you know, why is he doing well in the polls? It's because he's tapping into something very real. And I think it's back to this trade issue. American workers are tired of getting the screws, man. Tired of China kicking our behinds. And unfortunately, the Donald's not the answer. He and his ilk are the cause more than they're the answer. But the rhetoric has got people going, you know, hey, at least somebody's talking about this. Now, what's going on? China's having some problems. And it's reverberating over to us. Especially in the steel industry, this summer is going to be this next couple of months going to be very interesting in the steel industry as the companies here are going, hey, you know, opportunity knocks. Maybe we can go back and get some of those decent family sustaining wages, some of the fight back on the hours, fight back on the conditions, which is why I've asked Cole Stangler. He's a staff writer over at the International Business Times. He's written a great piece on the China slowdown that is coming to the Midwest. Cole, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, great to be back.
So, I look at this and I think, as you pointed out in your piece, and one of the charts that you have, and I highly suggest people take a look at it. Just go to thericksmithshow.com, click on Cole's name. One of the charts you have there is the production levels of the U.S., the production levels of Korea, and then the production level of China. And they are just off the charts.
Yeah, no, it really is shocking. I mean, the spike really takes off kind of mid-90s, early 2000s, and you can see that Chinese production is just ballooned since then, and basically dwarfs that of the United States right now.
So what's going on is you're seeing these, and as you point out in your article, we're seeing these companies that have their contracts come up with the steel workers, and now they're looking for concessions because, hey, times look like they could be rough, and it's a good opportunity, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Right, and as people who follow this kind of stuff from the labor end point out, there's nothing particularly new about that strategy if you're an employer, using a downturn in the industry to extract concessions, using it as a pretext to change things that don't necessarily even have to do with the reasons for the downturn. That's certainly what the union is saying. And so, they'll talk about, the major problem in their estimation is China. Basically, you have this massive amount of production in China. Now the Chinese market is slowing down, and so you have all this excess steel that's on the market that's coming in the United States. Prices are going down. U.S. steel can't compete with that, and so the question, if you're a worker, a steel worker, is what does the fact that I get overtime for working more than 8 hours in a day have to do with the fact that you have this massive amount of Chinese steel hitting the market and putting the company in this downturn. And so that's sort of where the conflict is workers are saying, the union is saying, we don't have anything to do with the problems that you're facing right now, and you're basically using this as a pretext to go after the contract. And in their words, they're saying this is what the proposals that U.S. Steel has on the table right now, they're saying are going back to the 50s and 60s.
Right. Let me ask you this: in talking to the people that you were able to meet there in Granite City, Illinois, which I guess is southern part of Illinois.
Yeah, it's right across the river from St. Louis.
So the conversation you had, how much of it do they see as the company taking advantage of this, or do they see it as maybe they've got some interest with the company against our trade policies? Because we really are being pitted against a mercantilist country who's going to cheat at every turn. They cheat on their currency. They cheat in heavily subsidizing and owning their industries. At what point is it that's more the cause than opportunity, or is it just both?
No, I mean, Rick, that's a really good question. It's something that I was trying to figure out as well, and I think people have different perspectives on it. But basically, I think people that work there feel like they're being left behind. Basically by everybody. They feel like they're being screwed by the Chinese producers. They feel like they're being screwed by the U.S. government for not sticking up enough against these violations, or not all of them are, but a lot of them can be construed as violations of trade policy. They're also upset at the fact that U.S. Steel is trying to gut the contract. And so I think like people feel like they have been left behind by basically everybody, and they're sort of just pissed off. And I think it's easy to understand why.
And I would say rightly so, because it comes back to we're not doing enough to protect American jobs and American workers in this country. And it's both sides of the political aisle that have consumed this open border trade ideal that we've been trying for now, 30 some years, and it's just not working, at least not well for working people.
Right. Yeah. I think there's I think you're absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount of frustration about that. And it's not helped also by the fact that, right now, as we speak, the U.S. government is negotiating, a Democratic administration is negotiating, a giant trade deal that, as one of the guys I spoke with said, would make NAFTA look like Christmas. And another guy said he thinks that's the nail in the coffin for the steel industry, and that's a Trans-Pacific Partnership. So, you're right. It's not only have these policies led to a weakening of the American steel industry over the last few decades, but we're actually about to sign another one of these trade deals that is arguably more significant, covers a larger portion of the global economy than even NAFTA, than some of these smaller trade agreements.
But here's the thing that gets me. And as I was looking at the chart that you included in your piece, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking back to World War II. We're always told, the reason we won World War II is because we could outproduce the world. We were able to build tanks and planes and bombs and all that stuff. I got to be honest, a nation that doesn't produce things is a nation in trouble. And I look at this, and our steel production has actually gone down, while theirs has just gone off the charts. They've got to dump it somewhere. And you look at the need here in the U.S. hasn't gone down. It's just that we've outsourced all that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a smaller piece of the story also, which is kind of its own conversation. But you have these cheaper mini mills, non-union mini mills that are able to churn out steel at lower costs. So that's another problem. But it's a really difficult landscape. And the scary thing about it too is if you're a steel worker right now, is the downturn in China, threatens to make things worse.
Right.
They're, not only, people complain about China devaluing currency, before, and now they're doing it even more, or they're pledging to.
Well, I've been talking about their currency manipulation for at least 5 or 6 years now, at least. And you go, at some point, don't we, I remember when I had asked Hillary Clinton about this when she was running in 2008. I go, whose fault is it when China's kicking our behind and we allow them to do it? If they're stealing our lunch, whose fault is it? And she said, obviously, it's our fault because we're allowing it. We've basically given them all of our industry and allowed American corporations to move over there and then to bring all their stuff back without really much of a penalty.
Yeah. No, I think you can definitely make the case. And I think the other thing about this too is, even just like talking to people as I was reporting the story, is I think there's this kind of idea, not among people who work in the industry necessarily, but people elsewhere who see just kind of this long, crushing, depressing decline of steel, and they assume that it's something that's inevitable. This is part of, it's ingrained into history, and it's ingrained into economic progress that basically, we just can't produce steel anymore, and we're going to, it'll be gone.
Which isn't true, because I just had a conversation with someone not too long ago who said, in this country we produce steel much more efficiently than basically any country in the world.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I mean, I think I think you can make the case maybe in the 70s and 80s there were some plants that weren't the most efficient plants in the U.S. But I think right now, I mean, just to be able to survive in the global market for steel, the plants that do exist that are in the United States, and keep in mind, way fewer of them exist than they did in the past. Those plants that are there right now, like the one in Granite City, those are these are really highly efficient, state-of-the-art technology plants that are around. And so I think you're absolutely right.
So let me ask you this, Cole, because in any of these stories, what you end up getting is a portion of the population who goes, I don't care, those union workers, they're overpaid. Much like in the 70s, they said, well, they get 13 weeks vacation. That's why the company went down, which is ridiculous. They didn't get 13 weeks vacation a year. But there's this perception that they have all of these things and that life is so wonderful for them. How much of is the perception of maybe people not being as upset or as involved in this story as I think should be?
You mean how are people reacting to steelworkers' benefits? I mean, I think in a town, Illinois is a huge state, but I think a town like Granite City has been the town has been really dominated by the presence of steel manufacturing for actually over a century. So people in the community feel connected in a way to the plant, in a way that you might not have elsewhere. So people who work at pizza parlors, people who produce clothes in the town.
It's the economic driver of the city. It's the center of the city. It's where the wealth comes from.
Right. And it's been there for a very long time. And I even I was fascinated as somebody who's interested in labor history, to find out that the union hall that's been in Granite City has been around for a very long time. Eugene Debs spoke there back in the 20s. It's a town with a really robust historic tradition of being a bastion of organized labor and of steel production. And so people there are kind of anxious about what's going on. The other thing to point out, which I haven't said already, is that this plant almost closed was almost temporarily idled a few months ago. The company's U.S. Steel said in I think March that they were going to idle the plant in May, and so that didn't happen. So it's like, people are already on edge because of that, and now you have these tough contract talks coming up, or going on right now, I should say, where the company is trying to extract as much as they can. It's a really nervous time for the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what you expect before contract time. You expect those kind of announcements, as anybody who's been in a union in a manufacturing facilities understands. They're going to use those threats of, hey, you know what? If we don't get what we want, we're going to move overseas. We're going to move down south. We're going to take the jobs and go. So you better take what we give you.
Right.
I mean, that seems to be, that's the MO. It just is what it is. So, in looking at this, because again, it comes back to we're still arguing and debating the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. In looking at this situation, does not passing an agreement like that help this situation any? I know the steelworkers have done a bunch of work throughout the Obama administration to fight back on some of the dumping, some of the trade violations, some of that stuff, even if the administration doesn't want to. Is this, where do you see that going?
I mean, I think you can make a case that getting, signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, getting it finalized, having Congress pass it will make things worse. I think that case, is easier to make than saying that things are going to improve just because just because people don't sign the TPP. I mean, I think they're in a bad position right now, and so the fear is if you sign the TPP, just because China is not part of the agreement doesn't mean that you're not getting. Because of the weak rules of origin, which is a complicated part of the agreement. Basically, you can have Chinese steel benefiting from the agreement coming through imports to the U.S. from other countries that are part of the agreement. So like South Korea, Malaysia, some of those other countries would basically be the conduit for Chinese steel to continue to hit the U.S. market, but with more benefits. And so I think that the fear is the TPP is going to really aggravate things. I think it's hard to say that the not passing TPP is going to be the magic bullet. I think there's other things that people would say, like becoming more aggressive on cracking down on currency manipulation, and also these dumping cases as well. What's interesting is that you were talking about to what extent companies and the companies and the unions are in the union are in the same boat, and on this they've actually teamed up. So they've teamed up to file these trade cases, and they've actually won a bunch of them. They've won over 30 going back to 2000, accusing China and other countries of dumping steel and illegally subsidizing their steel. The problem is those cases are really expensive. They take a long time. So as people describe it there, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. So it's very difficult.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where you've got to go back and you've got to start, in my view, you've got to start looking at steel and manufacturing, not just from a manufacturing perspective but from a national security perspective. At some point, in my view, you look at all the things that we don't make in this country anymore, and if you're going to be a military power, you need to have, in my view, the capability to produce. Just that simple for me.
Yeah, I mean that's an argument that might could get some traction, maybe from Republicans, more than saying let's protect the decent paying unionized manufacturing jobs.
Yeah, I mean, now last line of questioning I've got for you: does anybody think this is going to turn ugly there, like it has here in the Pittsburgh area, where they've locked out? ATI has locked out 2,200 of their workers and are actually bringing scabs in across the picket line. Does anyone see it going to that, or what's the feel you're getting?
I mean, it's really hard to say, but my hunch is, I think at this point, I mean, so first off, I should say, I mean, the union is telling people to be prepared for the possibility of a strike or a lockout, like any good union would do.
Right.
But my hunch is that I think that the sides are so far apart right now that it probably wouldn't even make sense for there to be, for the union to call a strike, for instance, because they're just so far away from even any sort of agreement. So I think if like if I had to speculate, I think that, the deadline is September 1st, which is rapidly approaching. They're not going to hit that deadline. I suspect we might see things kind of play out. I don't think there's a risk right now for for an immediate strike or lockout. Is my hunch. I think that the sides, again, are just so far apart right now that it's probably not in either of their interests to do that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this. And as it continues, we'd love to have you come back and keep us up to date and informed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much, Cole. I appreciate it, man. Great piece.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Cole Stangler. You can check out his piece, thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Cole's name, take you right there. We've got a link to the article. China slowdown comes to the Midwest. Anxiety grips U.S. steel town. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Rick Smith Show.
It is just mind-boggling to watch this happening.
A lot of flooding all over the city. Buildings have collapsed. There are reports from New Orleans of people trapped in buildings, but there could be far worse still to come.
The 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
And it's very likely to get worse in the future.
NASA warns at least 3 feet of sea level rise now locked in. Obama heads to the Arctic to highlight global warming. Plus,
it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Switching to clean energy will cost less than fossil fuels in the long run, says Citibank.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
There is no perfect source of energy. Every one of them has a downside. Solar is great, but solar takes huge amounts of water.
Oh, Carly Fiorina, you are darling. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I remember it like it was yesterday, unfortunately. The day that Hurricane Katrina came ashore 10 years ago this week.
Yes, Hurricane Katrina was the powerful hurricane that wrought devastation across much of the Gulf Coast, but drowned the city of New Orleans. Back in 2005, we were broadcasting live from the anti-war protests at the Bush Ranch in Crawford, Texas, when the frightening National Weather Service alert came across the wires.
It's actually from the National Weather Service, a most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille of '69.
Oh my.
Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks.
Katrina's ferocity was the first that many in the public had ever heard of global warming. But the real cause of the devastation was the oil and gas industry's decades-long destruction of Louisiana's storm buffering wetlands, plus the shoddy levee system built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to hold back the ocean, created the conditions that allowed Katrina's storm surge to flood the city, killing an estimated 1,800 people. Hurricane Katrina changed the face of New Orleans forever. The costliest hurricane yet in the U.S. Its heartbreaking aftermath exposed our nation's deep vulnerability to disasters. Resilience to the accelerating impacts of global warming is also the core message of what the White House is labeling President Obama's climate change tour. After skewering the oil industry for its anti-free market efforts to kill clean energy in Nevada, and then commemorating Katrina's devastation in New Orleans, Obama goes to the Arctic Circle, the first sitting American president to do so. The goal of the trip is to help Americans and the corporate news media confront the fact that climate change is not some distant threat, but is impacting Americans right now.
You know, it'd be a hell of a lot easier for the president to do that had he just not given the final approval to Shell Oil to drill in that very same Arctic.
Obama will be visiting coastal villages in Alaska that are having to relocate away from the surging ocean, even while the permafrost melts beneath them. Now, some impacts are unavoidable. NASA confirms this week that sea level rise continues to accelerate thanks to global warming. Moreover, in this study, they say, quote, "It is pretty certain we're locked into at least 3 feet of sea level rise and probably more." In other words, they say it's not a question of if, but when.
Well, when? Do they give a timeline for any of this?
They don't. They say they don't have the data yet to be able to estimate when this will all happen. They said it could be 100 years, it could be less. Meanwhile, a new economic report finds that the cost of moving to clean energy would be cheaper than our current fossil fuel-based economy. The detailed economic analysis from banking giant Citigroup finds that over the next 30 years, the cost of transitioning to clean energy is about the same as what the world would have spent on fossil fuels anyway over the same period of time.
Oh, those lefty tree huggers at Citibank.
And they say we would save billions, if not trillions of dollars, avoiding the risk of disasters from global warming impacts. On the broadcast this week, environmental journalist David Roberts of Vox.com said the Citigroup researchers were so stunned by their results, they concluded their report with a simple question.
Do you do the same thing you're doing at enormous risk, or do you take this alternative route, which costs about the same and avoids this enormous risk? They basically say, like, why would you not do this? Like, it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Why would you not do that? Hey, Citibank, have you met what has become of the U.S. Congress? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. You can download our reports anytime via iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans and miss it each night and day? I know I'm not wrong. The feeling's getting stronger the longer I stay away. Mr. Moss-covered vine.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
What the hell we fighting for? Just surrender and it won't hurt at all. Just got time to say your prayer. While you're waiting for the hammer to fall.
Well, woke up a couple of people with that. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. You know what's interesting? You go back to our conversation with Cole Stangler and the not letting a good crisis go to waste. You know, I was looking at some of the things that U.S. Steel wants. And it's what most companies want when they go and they do the, hey, you know, there's a crisis. We need that stuff back. You know, those things that generations fought for, you know, like healthcare. They want to increase the costs for active workers and for retirees. And my part with the retirees is really, look, these folks spent their entire lives working for a company saying we're going to take deferred compensation so that in our older years, we'll have health care. You're promising to do that for less wages. And we're going to give that up because we'll have some security. Now you've got these companies who are going back on this. You know, we used to be a nation of promises. We used to be a nation that kept our word. It's interesting how we have to keep our word when it comes to the banks. We have to keep our word when it comes to the credit card companies. We got to keep our word when it comes to the wealth class. But the other way around, them keeping their word to their workforce, no, not so much. Because, you know, the investors won't have money then, and that would be bad for them. The heck with the retirees, heck with the workers. So they want to massively increase the cost of healthcare for both the active workforce and the folks who spent their lives building the company, who were fortunate enough to retire. And maybe that's something that's going to go away in our lifetime. We won't have to worry about it. They also want to change the overtime rules to do away with the 8-hour workday. So you can work 40 hours straight, and then that 41st hour, you'll get overtime. When I was growing up, and I've had these conversations with younger friends who have said, that overtime after 8, that's old school. And I go, no, when I was younger, when I was, in my 20s, that was common. That's how things were done. The incentive was that you didn't work more than 8 hours a day. And if you were forced to work more than 8 hours a day, the employer had a little bit of a penalty. They paid a little overtime. So you could say, yeah, I want to work a little overtime. The company said, okay, we're willing to pay you. And you did that. You didn't create an entire workforce of we're going to work 20 hours a day. They also want a guaranteed minimum reduction in the number of hours. Evidently, the contract guarantees a full-time worker 40 hours. They want to drop that down to 32. They also want to use a ton of non-union contractors to come in and do whatever it is that they want to do, and they also want to destroy seniority rights. Seems pretty much par for the course, if you will. Pretty much par for the course. And I look out in Pittsburgh. There's this Allegheny Technologies out there that they just locked out, I think, like 2,200 of their workers. And I came across this Craigslist ad. Someone sent me a link to it and said, hey, you got to check this out. Evidently, they're doing it all across the Commonwealth. They're putting it in newspapers. They're putting it all over the place to bring in scabs into Pittsburgh. They're promising up to $3,000 per week. And all you have to do for that $3,000 a week is be a scab and cross the picket line. Oh, and the other part of it is you have to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week, 84 hours a week. You have to stand the entire shift, the entire 84 hours, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. After being, driven in a bus through a picket line, you have to work in high temperatures. You have to work in a manufacturing environment, be able to lift up to 50 pounds for 12 hours a day for 7 days. And for that, you'll get $3,000. And oh, by the way, selling your soul and becoming a scab. Someone who I have no respect. And I've talked about this before. I think Jack London was right. There's no lower creature on this planet than a scab. Someone who would cross someone's picket line, someone who would cross the threshold of someone else's life. And I've always likened it for my non-union friends, for people who don't have the same kind of passion for unions that I may have. Imagine if you and your wife are having, some troubles. You and your wife are going through, a rough patch, little rough patch, where you're kind of not liking each other at this moment. And the neighbor kind of goes, I see this. And while you go to work, he comes over and he's knocking on the door, playing nice, talking about what a no good, you know what you are, trying to horn his way in. That's basically a scab. Now, here's the thing, and this is the beautiful part of this. And the company doesn't want these people either. The company are simply using these scabs as a tool to destroy wages, hours, conditions for the workforce that they're inevitably going to bring back, because those are the people who know how to do the job better than anyone. But they want them at a lower wage. They want to destroy their conditions. They're just using you as a short-term tool that they will then discard. Now you got your, $3,000 if you could make the 84 hours a week, and they will discard you. My frustration is we as a society aren't the society that I grew up in. And I've told the story a number of times about the guy who lived catty corner from my grandparents. My grandfather told me, you don't ever go play with that guy's kids. You see kids over there, you stay away. Or else. And I didn't want to know what or else was, so I didn't. I got to be a little older, in my early 20s, and going, what was that all about? And he told me back, like 50 years ago, that guy crossed the picket line when the railroads were on strike. He was ostracized by society. Nobody in the neighborhood talked to him. Nobody in the neighborhood would have any interaction with them. He was the scab. We need to return to those days, because the only way we're going to build a solid working class again, a prosperous working class again, is if we understand the idea of solidarity. We understand that a company like ATI, who's going to go across this state to pay thousands and thousands of dollars more than $150,000 a year you could make just by scabbing, so that they could destroy wages, hours, conditions for their workforce that they're going to bring back. That's the part that I think is really very important. So I find it interesting that, and I guess it's going to be interesting to see if anyone actually does in the Pittsburgh area. The hope is that they do not. And that by not having scabs crossing the picket line, maybe they go back to the bargaining table and work things out, much like you and your wife would do without the interference of someone else. Just my thought. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Never you will look back again. We'll fight on to the end. Together we will live on forevermore. In this land we have defended from all things dark and cruel. Now we are defenseless.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
Good news about obesity. A new scientific organization is coming to grips with this bulging national problem. Called the Global Energy Balance Network, it comes at obesity from a unique perspective, namely that the key to controlling one's weight is not cutting back on calorie consumption, but committing to a regular program of exercise. Great, huh? You can literally have your cake and eat it too. Before you swallow GEBN's approach, however, note that nearly all scientists on the obesity beat say the opposite. Exercise is a minimal contributor to weight loss compared to putting fewer calories in the tank. So what's behind the contrarian new group? Coca-Cola. Yes, Global Energy Balance Network was created and is financed by the world's leading purveyor of sugary sodas. And Coke is also the leading purveyor of empty calorie science, trying to convince us that its bottled bombs of obesity have no bad effects on human health. The corporate giant's latest scientific fraud is prompted by corporate panic. Sales of full-calorie sodas have plummeted by 25% in the past 2 decades as public health campaigns have ratcheted up to warn of cola's dangers. Consequently, obesity rates, especially for young children, are down. And Coca-Cola now lists obesity concerns by the public as the #1 threat to its business. The choice between your health and the health of their corporate profits is an easy decision for Coke's top executives. So they're trying this trick play to shift the obesity blame from their calories to your lack of exercise. This is Jim Hightower saying, next they'll be promoting the Coca-Cola workout plan. Do several repetitions of 12-ounce elbow bends each day with cans of Coca-Cola, and keep your heart strong by briskly striding to the fridge to grab each can. Remember, every repetition adds up.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. Greece has a new prime minister, the country's first female head of state. Vasiliki Thanou was previously the top judge on the Greek Supreme Court, and her caretaker government will take over on Friday. If all goes to plan, Thanou won't be in office for long. There are national elections scheduled for September 20th to choose a replacement for Alexis Tsipras of the Syriza party, who resigned last week after successfully negotiating a multi-year bailout for the country. The International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting that Iran has constructed a new building at its Parchin military facility. Parchin is not mentioned in a July 14th nuclear agreement, but monitors are wary of activity at a facility where they suspect nuclear weapons-related work may have occurred in the past. IAEA inspectors are due to publish a report in December in an attempt to clear up exactly what Iran has been up to in recent years, and they worry new construction could be used to obscure evidence. And Tolkien fans, it's time to expand your literary knowledge. The great writer behind The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and Silmarillion. HarperCollins published a prose work called The Story of Kullervo today in the United Kingdom, though American listeners will have to wait until October for a U.S. release. Kullervo was Tolkien's first foray into prose and is an adaptation of a Finnish tragedy about a boy raised by an enemy tribe. Early reviews suggest the work is indeed quite dark, but according to Tolkien's own letters, the original Finnish epic that inspired the work greatly influenced his later fantasy worlds, and for that, we can be thankful. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
I don't want everybody to vote.
Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
The billionaires don't want you to vote this year. We'll send you a message that's loud and clear that the votes can't be counted in your community. Why even register?
Yeah, you don't need to vote. Why would you even want to sign up? Why would you want to? It's all bought, right? Bought, paid for. The Trumps of the world own it, right? Well, good news here in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, thanks to our governor, whom I have much admiration for. Now over the internet, you can sign up to vote. You can register and sign up. You don't have to find your way to the DMV. You don't have to do any of that. And of course, no photo ID. What I find interesting, before we talk a little bit about this, you look at Alabama. We were just in Alabama as part of the People's Tour. Alabama has an interesting thing going on right now. They've got a budget fight kind of like we have. So their solution, and you got to love this, they're going to close another 12 of their post offices, of their DMVs in January of 2016, and they're primed to phase out 33 more. So the entire state, get this, the entire state of Alabama is going to have a whopping four places where you can go get your driver's license. It'll be Huntsville, Montgomery, Mobile, and Birmingham. If you live anywhere else in the state of Alabama, well, screw you, because there's not there. Now, understand this. These are the same people who say that we're okay. We don't need the Voting Rights Act. We don't need any of that stuff. But you still need a voter ID to vote, and you get that where? The DMV. It's kind of like here in Pennsylvania, where you had a number of counties that didn't have DMVs in the county for you to get that photo ID. Because you remember that whole argument, Daryl Metcalf and his clan rammed through what is now unconstitutional piece of legislation that said everybody had to have a photo ID. Never mind if you don't drive, never mind if you don't have the money to buy a car, you have to have an ID. And you've got to find your way to one of these licensing centers, of which some counties didn't have one. And some counties only had certain hours, maybe on a Tuesday sometime. Kind of makes you wonder about, oh yeah, that's right. We don't want everyone to vote. Our leverage goes up as the voting populace goes down. Just like Paul Weyrich, the founder of the Heritage Foundation, just like he pointed out as he was talking to 20,000 Baptist ministers back in 1980 in Dallas, Texas. This has been the plan all along. This has been the dream, if you will. If we can hold down the number of people who vote, they think they can win. Why did Tom Corbett said if we could just hold the vote down in Philadelphia, we'll do okay? Why do you think he said that? Because he understands the only way they win is to keep poor and working people from not voting. Pretty simple stuff. You got a thought on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Alabama is a really big state, too. I mean, when we were driving through, it took us 4 or 5 hours.
What do you need a license for in Alabama?
Yeah. It's a freedom state. You don't need that stuff.
That's right. There you go. It's a freedom state. You don't need any of that stuff. Just drive. Go ahead. Ride your horse or whatever it is you do. But good news yesterday. And I think this announcement by the governor and his Secretary of the Commonwealth, Pedro Cortez, I think is a good announcement. I think it moves us into the 21st century. I think it's going to help save the Commonwealth a little bit of money. It's going to help maybe reduce some paper waste, some of that stuff. And also, I think, strengthen the ability of if there is any fraud out there, which the Commonwealth said they're in their stipulation of fact in the lawsuit, that there isn't any. This is the Corbett administration saying we can't find any fraud, but we're going to go through with legislation claiming there is fraud. You figure it out. I can't. But they did. Unconstitutional. But now this is going to help with that, I think.
And yesterday, Daryl Metcalf was pretty upset with this. actually, and the Republican person, their wordsmith, Miskin, called Governor Wolf the Imperial Emperor of Pennsylvania because of this.
Uh-huh.
Even though,
because we want to expand the ability for folks to vote, and even though it passed the Senate last time around 50-0, 50-0, and you've got Schmucker, who is no fancy pants liberal, who said, well, it's a good thing, moving us into the right direction.
a bunch of Republicans came out and said this was a good thing yesterday from the Senate.
But you've got Durrell. Durrell. You got him going, no, it's because people are lazy and they don't want to vote. And this would have passed under the Corbett administration.
Unanimously, probably, inside the House.
It unanimously passed the Senate. Unanimously, everyone. Nothing passes unanimously except us.
Yeah.
And all because of Mad Cow, it got bottled up in the state government committee. And this is the problem.
He didn't even have a hearing on it.
This is the problem with having some crazy people in charge of these committees. We're turning into Washington here in Pennsylvania. One of the things I feared at the beginning of the Wolf administration is that you would have the Mad Cows and some of these other crazy people, the Blooms of the world, taking positions much like we're seeing in DC, where nothing gets done. Here we are. The budget's 2 months overdue?
68, 58, or no, 50,
it's almost 2 months.
Yeah.
You go, work much? No. You've got my state representative doing the job of a talk show host across town. Didn't have anything better to do, I guess. We elected him to do a job, but no. I think I'm going to go do the radio guy's job for a day.
I think we should call him during the last hour and see how he's doing.
It's one of those things that you go, at some point, folks, not getting much. I don't know. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Me and my people are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive air strike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. 10 years on from the Hurricane Katrina disaster, social justice groups are still working in the Gulf region to overcome decades of social and economic injustice. Martha Bergmark of the Mississippi Center for Justice reflects on the hurricane and the social justice struggle that occurred in its wake.
Hard to really imagine, in a way, just how cataclysmic it was, and yet it was an event that really peeled back the layers on social justice problems that have plagued our region forever. In trying to recover from this terrible disaster, we had an opportunity to try to do it in a way that was more equitable, more fair to some of the hurricane's most vulnerable survivors. So 10 years later, we see a region that has recovered in many ways, I think because of the work of civil legal aid and social justice partners across the region. And yet we did not change the underlying reality that, hundreds of years of well-entrenched policy and practice have put in place. We still are a region that is our nation's poorest, where folks at the bottom of the ladder have the biggest struggles.
Bergmark says that the civil legal aid she mentioned is critical for poor and working people if they are to get social and economic justice.
If folks at the bottom of the economic spectrum can't have access to legal help, just right there along with all the other sort of first response kind of needs that have to be met, there just needs to be a recognition that legal help is first and foremost at near the top of the list.
The Bank of Labor is raising wages, joining the AFL-CIO effort to put more money in workers' pockets. The Bank of Labor says it's setting a minimum wage of $15 an hour for its employees. Bank of Labor is based in Kansas City, Kansas, and has an office in Washington, D.C. Workers there are members of the United Mine Workers. The bank and the UMWA both embraced the AFL-CIO call to raise wages. The Bank of Labor was founded and is majority-owned by the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, iron ship builders, blacksmiths, forgers, and helpers. Bank of Labor CEO Newton Jones says that the AFL-CIO's Raising Wages campaign benefits all workers, union and non-union alike, by setting a standard to which all employers should aspire. Through such initiatives, he says, we can help restore the middle class. Workers Independent News is made possible in part through underwriting support from OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. If you like this labor news, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and visit us at laborradio.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
If the federal government continues to do the kinds of things that this administration is trying to do through the back door, through the National Labor Relations Board, that's killing our free market system.
We're running out of rich people in this country.
The NLRB has become a political sycophant for labor unions.
And one of the things the Congress should do immediately is defund the National Labor Relations Board.
It seems to me that what we're seeing is a ceding of power from Congress to the NLRB and other agencies.
Really is a freedom versus tyranny issue.
I'm a member of the GOP, trying to form a plutocracy. But if I can just bamboozle you, and you'll share my narrow point of view, what a wonderful world this would be.
Yes, what a wonderful world. We can just screw workers out of wages, take us back to the good old days of the Lochner era, where if you're desperate enough, if you're hungry enough, you'll work in crummy conditions for no wages, and you'll be happy to have it. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So yesterday, I guess it was, probably, in my view, the biggest decision by the NLRB, and the Newt Gingriches and the Rand Pauls and the Herman Cain train, all of them, their heads have got to be exploding, because this, I believe, is the biggest decision since Reagan fired the shot across the boardroom to fire those Patco workers, which is why I've asked Dave Jamieson. He's written a fantastic piece over at Huffington Post. We got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Dave's name. Dave, thanks for taking time for us, man.
Hey, Rick, good to be here.
So I'm looking at this Browning Ferris Industries decision. This is huge stuff.
It is, yeah. This is a huge deal, and I think you pretty soon you're going to have some more angry sound bites to add to that mashup you had in the intro there. People are going to get really worked up about it over on the Hill, because it's a big deal. Basically, what they're saying is this ruling kind of addresses this whole idea of a fissured economy here in the U.S., this idea of you doing work for one company but technically being employed by another. What the board is saying here is that that company at the top of the supply chain is going to have to be accountable to workers that, under the act, under the NLRA. And it's a big deal because it touches, for one thing, fast food, which is built upon franchising. You'll get a company like McDonald's, 90% of their stores are through franchisees. And the reason companies like McDonald's franchise is so that they can shift the responsibilities, the workplace responsibilities, onto somebody else. Right. And that's going to get trickier now. But it's not just fast food. Everybody's talking about how this will affect McDonald's and Burger King and all those giants, and it could be in all different sectors.
Yeah, my first thought, Dave, was Amazon. I mean, they're one of the big behemoths right now. I mean, Walmart gets a lot of attention, but to me, Amazon is the creature of the future, and to me, this is a huge decision again for them.
It is. You look at an Amazon warehouse, come fall time, in another month or two, you go to one of these warehouses, there might be 1,000 full-time workers there normally during the year. That's going to swell. It might be 3,000 or 4,000 when the busy season comes along. And most of those workers, those additional workers, are going to be temp workers. They're going to be working for a company that you never heard of, but they're going to be handling Amazon goods and sending them out to Amazon customers. And now, under this, I think Amazon, this is a very clear case that falls under this, the guidelines that the board laid out. I think any reasonable person looking at how those warehouses operate and the standards that Amazon sets that these temps have to abide by. I think going by the guidelines they've put out, I think Amazon is very likely a joint employer in these situations. Again, a big piece of this though, right, is we're talking about labor laws that pertains to the National Labor Relations Act. This doesn't really change wage and hour law. OSHA has been trying to address this stuff on their own, this joint employer stuff in their own way, but this, what happened yesterday doesn't affect that. But when it comes to possibly unionizing in these places, it's a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, I won't use the Joe Biden words, but I'm right there with Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Usually, the kind of the hyperbole, coming from the business community on these rulings, it's, you're used to them always saying that the sky is falling whenever the board does something. But I think there really is something to the fast and furious reaction we saw to this, because I think it really is a big deal.
Because what it's doing is it's undoing that business model that has benefited the top and really screwed the bottom. And at some point, I think that all that has to be addressed. Along with this, I think misclassification is another one of those things that have to be addressed.
It is, yeah. And I'm not sure how yesterday's ruling could affect somebody when you're talking about an independent contractor. I think that's a little trickier because by the nature of that, they're supposedly working for themselves, not for a staffing agency or something like that. But, the ruling yesterday, we so far we've talked about warehouses, we've talked about McDonald's. This stuff goes on in hotels now. You look at a company like Hyatt, they've got people working in their hotels, women cleaning the rooms, who work for these fly-by-night temp agencies that you have never ever heard of. Again, that's another case where under the standards they put out yesterday, I think very likely a lot of these big hotel chains would be found as joint employers. And that's a sector where we might see a lot of these cases, because here and other unions are very active in trying to unionize these places. And then all of a sudden, a lot of these temps could be found to be a joint employer under somebody like Hyatt. It's a big deal.
Let me ask you about this joint employer thing. When did this come about? Because, I think back to my grandparents' generation. I don't know that this stuff was around when they were in the workforce, and I don't know that they would have tolerated this kind of stuff. When did this start?
Yeah, there's a great book, David Wild. He's the head of Wage and Hour now. He wrote a book about this, and he coined the term the fissured workplace. And that's what this is about. And I've read it's a very good book, and he traces the way this has really developed over kind of the last 2-3 decades. Back in the day when our parents were coming up, you looked at, like, say, an office building, right? I work in a downtown DC office building. Back in the day when you worked, say, look at a factory or an office building, the people who clean that place at night when the lights went off, they tend to work for the companies that ran the building. Say it was, Acme widgets. All the people who did stuff for Acme tended to work for Acme. That started to change, 2-3 decades ago, when these companies decided to concentrate on core competencies, right? That's like, you look at Amazon. Amazon wants to focus on how they get stuff out the door. So they're going to outsource stuff, all these different things. They're going to focus on what they want to focus on, and they're going to have some temp agency or whoever worry about this other stuff. And that's kind of that's the way companies all over the place operate. And when you look at the warehouse, it's not just Amazon. Walmart's doing the same thing. They've got a dizzying array of temps in some of these temp agencies, bringing people in some of these warehouses. And that's the way companies go now. That's why a hotel, it's crazy to think that a woman who spends her day cleaning, setting the beds in a Hyatt hotel might not work for Hyatt, but that's how it is now.
Now, is this a matter of policy? Was this something that was decided, or is this just the free market at work?
It is the market at work, because when you're the company at the top, you can set a contract with whoever you're outsourcing this work to, and then you just don't have to worry about it. You say, all right, I'm going to give you $15 per man hour to get this done, and then the company comes in, and of course that encourages it. They got to get their piece out of it, so they're going to set the worker down at $10 or whatever. They're probably not going to give them benefits, And that's how there is the whole system sort of baked into the system is this downward pressure onto the people at the bottom, because you've got all these companies in there that are needing to get their cut and their profit. And a lot of times that's going to come at the expense of somebody at the bottom who's not going to have stable hours because of it. They're going to have a low wage, and they're not going to have health coverage and all of that stuff. It's really, it's kind of the way you see it play out all over the place.
Yeah, we've created an environment where the middleman is all along the chain, taking his cut out of the worker's pocket, not out of the corporation's pocket.
Yeah, it's weird. Some of these, the system has a way, a kind of almost this dehumanizing effect. In the case of Hyatt, you know, I wrote a story out in Indianapolis where the Hyatt hotels were doing this, and the agency they were using ran this ad, where in the ad, the visual, it was workers inside a vending machine, right? And the idea was they were advertising in a trade magazine to big chains like Hyatt, saying we're going to provide these workers when you need them, and it's going to be like putting quarters into a vending machine, and little workers are going to pop out.
Wow.
I mean, that was the actual ad they have. We still have it posted on the web. It's kind of amazing, but that's sort of the attitude that can end up being like engendered in this sort of system where workers aren't your responsibility. When you're the company at the top, it's just like you got a job that you got to get done. Let's find somebody else who will do it.
Yeah, which is why I've said for years, which is why I'm such a strong supporter of labor unions, of workers having the ability to collectively come together and have some say, have some rights, and not be treated like tokens in a vending machine.
Well, and hey, look, you know, you bring up unions. I mean, to get back to it, a huge piece of this is just a union avoidance effort. You know, it's when you're going to say I run a warehouse, you know, I'm going to outsource it. I'm going to have some third-party logistics provider run the warehouse. They're going to subcontract with like 4 or 5 temp agencies. And so you've got all these employees under the same roof who are working for different people. And that becomes a huge obstacle to unionization. You know, on top of all the turnover and everything, it's not even clear, you know, who these employees belong to. Yeah. And that's really what this big ruling yesterday is addressing. And that's what's given the lobbies fits right now.
And to highlight what you just said there, because I think it's important that people understand exactly what you've said. In the same warehouse, you could have 4 or 5 different companies in that same warehouse working for the main overlord company, if you will, sharing employees. I actually talked to a guy who worked for 2 of those companies in the same building, working 80 hours a week, not getting overtime.
Yeah, you could be loading or unloading a truck with somebody who, you know, in the real world is basically a colleague, but they work for somebody else. And it's like I've talked to people who don't even know who the other people are working for. It's not even clear what temp agency they're with.
I mean, so I think this ruling is the right ruling. It'll be interesting to see where it goes and how crazy people get. But when I first heard it, Amazon was the first company I thought of, and then FedEx was the next one, because you brought up the independent contractor, and to me, misclassification is another one of those huge problems, Dave. Here's a company that mandates what you wear, what you drive, what time you get there, all of that stuff, but somehow you're your own boss. I see that kind of in the same vein with this.
Yeah, and with FedEx, it's very interesting now. It's like they had a bunch of rulings come down against them on this, and so basically the employment chain has gotten even more complicated over there. Where basically like FedEx will contract with a company, and that company will will contract drivers beneath them of employment, and yeah, I think that you know, this ruling could definitely come into play there too.
Is it the end of the world, do you think?
I don't think so. I think next week McDonald's is still going to be serving hamburgers, but I do think these companies are they're basically going to be brought to the bargaining table in ways that they haven't had to before. They will survive it, but they're gonna have to deal with questions that until now they've conveniently been able to dodge.
Yeah, because they've been able to insulate themselves from the responsibilities and the risks.
That's why that's the word that the board used actually in their payoff line yesterday. They said that, you know, the law is not there to insulate companies from their responsibilities to workers. That's exactly what they said.
Yeah, and I'm glad this is a good ruling in my view. Last question I've got for you. Well, let's say this goes into effect and Donald Trump wins in 2016. Can the board undo this decision?
Yes, I as far as I know, they can. It would take a different board and a different makeup, but down the road, this board was just they were changing the standards set previously. And granted, this was very long running precedent, and it would be a big deal to overturn this. But it could be done. There's nothing to say it couldn't. The board is always going back and forth. That's one of the frustrating things, I think, for people who work in this area of law, is that things are always undone, often undone under a new board, under a new president.
Yeah, and to me, it's at some point we've got to set the rules of the game so that there's what the Republicans keep talking about, that they love consistency. Maybe that's a thought.
Absolutely.
All right, Dave, I appreciate the piece. Nice job. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dave Jamieson. He's written a good piece over at the Huffington Post. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Dave's name. Take you right there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Say the USA is drowning in crafted lies. Say the USA and resume the ties it bind. Stop taking all our money and shipping it offshore. Do the job you're looking for.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1963. That was the day of one of the most iconic stands for justice and equality in United States history. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech to 250,000 people in Washington, D.C. But did you know the official title for that history-making event was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom? The popular memory of the March on Washington focuses on the fight for freedom, especially the right for Black Americans to access public spaces and the voting booth. But the march organizers also understood that economic justice was a fundamental part of this broader call for freedom. As Dr. King once famously asked, "What good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger?" This emphasis on the importance of jobs and economic justice perhaps was most represented by A. Philip Randolph. He was one of the lead organizers of the 1963 March on Washington. Randolph was the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the nation's first national African-American union. Starting in World War I, Randolph fought for an end to employment discrimination. His efforts in planning the March on Washington were an extension of that earlier work. Organized labor had a mixed response to the march. The AFL-CIO did not endorse the march. Walter Reuther, head of the United Auto Workers, shared the stage in Washington, D.C. with Dr. King and A. Philip Randolph that day. It is important to remember the connection between the call for civil rights and the demand for the right to employment, fair wages, and dignity at the workplace. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about how a championship boxing match and the winner's attitudes and actions changed America. Muhammad Ali continued to challenge American norms, including refusal to fight in Vietnam. He was for many years a polarizing figure, but he made us think and he made us change, whether you respect him or not. Like any other game changer, he also had good timing. He came on the scene at the beginning of the TV era when everyone could hear and see him. Ali was the first end zone dancer, the first trash talker. He freed black athletes and entertainers to be themselves and to remove boundaries. And as historian Anthony Chesborough says, the Clay Liston fight forced white Americans to reconsider their views about blacks. Ali was a scary black man only because he was attacking the system. And that he was. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman. Executive Director of AFSCME, Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
At every trough you stop to feed. With your arrogance, your ignorance and greed. Now here come the cuts and redundancy. Through the absolute indifference, the avarice, incompetence, your arrogance, your ignorance, your greed.
Smith Show. I look at this, and this to me is huge. The fact that now you're going to be able to say that, let's say I work for a third-party logistics company at Amazon, for instance, and it could be any company, could be XYZ parts company that works for one of the big chains that has been contracted and subcontracted and subcontracted over here to do this work. You can now say, look, you, the big guy, you've got some say in this. You've got some responsibility in this. And I think this is good because now it's going to bring those big actors back to the table. And this would, in my view, actually help the smaller businesses, would actually help, as I'm thinking this through, would actually help the logistics companies in saying, look, the big guys got to, there are certain rules we're going to have to play by. And then you compete, I think, on the right levels. You compete on quality, efficiency, who does the best job, who's on time, who on different matrix than who's willing to slit their neighbor's throat for a penny. I mean, that's where we've been competing. Who's willing to work for less? How low will you go? How desperate are you? To me, that's really what this, I think, could do. It'll be interesting to see where the board takes this. I think this is important. I think this is groundbreaking, and it's right to say that, look, this, because what's happened is you end up going, okay, well, you two just beat each other up over this. And whichever one of you is the least bloody will do business with. If you can kill the other guy, that's great. This will then bring the McDonald's, the Amazons, the Walmarts, these big companies back to the table. Because the part here that has everyone's heads exploding, this could be that next round of union organizing that I've been saying is bubbling. Because as we talk to people all throughout the South, and as I've talked to workers across this country, you can feel that everyone knows something's wrong. Everyone knows that they've been getting screwed. Everyone knows that their wages are going down. They're working harder and harder for less and less, that they're taking on more and more responsibility and not getting rewarded for it. Everyone's feeling that. And for a while we were okay, going, the economy's real bad. We should just be happy we have a job. Just shh, happy to have a job. Don't say anything. But now as the economy's turning around and we're starting to go, well, you know what? We tighten the belt. I can't breathe. Now I'd like to loosen it up and, I don't know, actually get something out of it. This is where employers have got to be losing their minds, because for them, this is not a good ruling, because this means they're going to have to share some of the profits that their workers that they make. And this could be that, wow. And I'm glad that it is. As I said in the last bit, the next thing is the misclassification. this idea that you're an independent contractor, but you work when I say, where I say, get to where I say, when I say, wear my uniform, carry the logo, all of this stuff, but yet you're your own boss. Kind of nuts, isn't it? I mean, if you can explain it, I'd love to hear it. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. But this ruling, I think, is going to be that ground setting moment where we say, you know what, you're going to compete, but now, big boys, you're involved in this. And I think this is going to be a good thing for the taxpayer as well, because you look at the fast food industry. What has happened is you've got the guys taking the most of the money, the corporate headquarters, be it McDonald's, be it Yum Brand, be it any Burger King, and Tony Hortons, be it any of those. And them just saying, well, sorry, that's those guys down there, those little guys down there who are just, they're just fighting it out amongst themselves. And, it's tough business down there, got to compete. Not our responsibility. Now what this law looks like it says is, you know what? It's partially your responsibility. You're going to get called into this. And maybe what you'll see happen is you'll see some of these companies then go, well, you know what? We might as well hire back our janitors, and might as well hire back our cleaning people, and might as well hire back our electricians, and might as well hire back all of the jobs that we used to have before that we've just decided, you know what? We can destroy those unions and cut benefits and cut healthcare and cut pensions and cut wages and cut until people are strangling and starved. Maybe they'll start going, well, might as well. No real benefit here. Just one of those thoughts. Anyway, we got to take a quick break. Right back. And then when we come back and talk a little bit about what's going on in Harrisburg, since we've been gone, a little refresher. Also, our conservative alert. Not going to want to miss that. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith
Show. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
It is just mind-boggling to watch this happening.
A lot of flooding all over the city. Buildings have collapsed. There are reports from New Orleans of people trapped in buildings, but there could be far worse still to come.
The 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
And it's very likely to get worse in the future.
NASA warns at least 3 feet of sea level rise now locked in. Obama heads to the Arctic to highlight global warming. Plus,
it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Switching to clean energy will cost less than fossil fuels in the long run, says Citibank.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
There is no perfect source of energy. Every one of them has a downside. Solar is great, but solar takes huge amounts of water.
Oh, Carly Fiorina, you are darling. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I remember it like it was yesterday, unfortunately. The day that Hurricane Katrina came ashore 10 years ago this week.
Yes, Hurricane Katrina was the powerful hurricane that wrought devastation across much of the Gulf Coast, but drowned the city of New Orleans. Back in 2005, we were broadcasting live from the anti-war protests at the Bush Ranch in Crawford, Texas, when the frightening National Weather Service alert came across the wires.
It's actually from the National Weather Service, a most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille of '69.
Oh, my.
Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks.
Katrina's ferocity was the first that many in the public had ever heard of global warming. But the real cause of the devastation was the oil and gas industry's decades-long destruction of Louisiana's storm buffering wetlands, plus the shoddy levee system built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to hold back the ocean, created the conditions that allowed Katrina's storm surge to flood the city, killing an estimated 1,800 people. Hurricane Katrina changed the face of New Orleans forever. The costliest hurricane yet in the U.S. Its heartbreaking aftermath exposed our nation's deep vulnerability to disasters. Resilience to the accelerating impacts of global warming is also the core message of what the White House is labeling President Obama's climate change tour. After skewering the oil industry for its anti-free market efforts to kill clean energy in Nevada, and then commemorating Katrina's devastation in New Orleans, Obama goes to the Arctic Circle, the first sitting American president to do so. The goal of the trip is to help Americans and the corporate news media confront the fact that climate change is not some distant threat, but is impacting Americans right now.
You know, it'd be a hell of a lot easier for the president to do that had he just not given the final approval to Shell Oil to drill in that very same Arctic.
Obama will be visiting coastal villages in Alaska that are having to relocate away from the surging ocean, even while the permafrost melts beneath them. Now, some impacts are unavoidable. NASA confirms this week that sea level rise continues to accelerate thanks to global warming. Moreover, in this study, they say, quote, "It is pretty certain we're locked into at least 3 feet of sea level rise and probably more." In other words, they say it's not a question of if, but when.
Well, when? Do they give a timeline for any of this?
They don't. They say they don't have the data yet to be able to estimate when this will all happen. They said it could be 100 years, it could be less. Meanwhile, a new economic report finds that the cost of moving to clean energy would be cheaper than our current fossil fuel-based economy. The detailed economic analysis from banking giant Citigroup finds that over the next 30 years, the cost of transitioning to clean energy is about the same as what the world would have spent on fossil fuels anyway over the same period of time.
Oh, those lefty tree huggers at Citibank.
And they say we would save billions, if not trillions of dollars, avoiding the risk of disasters from global warming impacts. On the broadcast this week, environmental journalist David Roberts of Vox.com said the Citigroup researchers were so stunned by their results, they concluded their report with a simple question.
Do you do the same thing you're doing at enormous risk, or do you take this alternative route, which costs about the same and avoids this enormous risk? They basically say, like, why would you not do this? Like, it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Why would you not do that? Hey, Citibank, have you met what has become of the U.S. Congress? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. You can download our reports anytime via iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans and miss it each night and day? I know I'm not wrong. The feelings get me.
Just when you thought it was safe, those crazy Republicans are at it again. It's time for the Rick Smith Show's Conservative Alerts.
Well, here it is. Crazy come to Pennsylvania. You didn't think we could go a whole summer without some insanity from the General Assembly. And I got to be honest, sent out a tweet to Representative Ryan Warner, the Republican from Fayette, Westmoreland County, thanking him for reminding me that Daryl Metcalf wasn't the only crazy legislator that we have here in Pennsylvania, because he announced recently that he's introduced legislation to, here it comes, wait for it, we're going to bring back the whole English only thing. Everything is Pennsylvania is English only, the official language of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, kind of making us like Arizona. why not? Let's be crazy just like them. He has put forth House Bill 1506. And the regular cavalcade of crazy who have signed on, the mad cows and the rest of them. Not surprising. Here to get a quick reaction, our good friend, he is the Pennsylvania legislative director for LIUNA, Abe Amoros. Abe, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome, Rick. Thank you for having me.
So what do you think? Official language of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, English only.
Rick, when I first came to the United States, I didn't speak a lick of English. I came here from Puerto Rico. My family instilled in me the love of the English language. And my mother, who was a teacher's aide in a public high school all of her life, always told us that in order to be a success in life, you need to master the English language. You need to speak it well. You need to write it well. You need to read it well. For that reason, I became educated in the English language, and I think I can hold my own with just about anybody in the United States or in the world. And I can safely tell you that the English language is in no way, shape, or form in danger of being extinct anywhere on the planet.
Are you sure?
Much less South Central Pennsylvania or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It is absolutely mind-boggling how these crazy bills, Rick, always surface to really stir up a false sense of patriotism. This is nothing more than red meat for the right wing and stirring up the pot against immigrants. That's all this is. English as the official language is completely unnecessary. Now, in 1991, the city of Allentown adopted or tried to adopt an English-only ordinance. At the time, there was a Republican mayor in place who himself said, if we adopt this as a cost-saving measure, because that's what it was being painted as, Rick, is that, oh, we're spending way too much money publishing these forms in other languages like Spanish or Vietnamese or Mandarin or Russian. He stood up there before that council and he said, listen, I'm embarrassed to say that it's going to be a grand total of $45 being saved on forms. So, again, these are sneaky, backward attempts to provide red meat for the right wing, to stir up the pot, to get people angry, and to really stimulate what I consider to be a false sense of patriotism. Rick, I have come across a lot of people in my lifetime. I have only come across one individual who has refused to learn English out of principle. Just one. They don't really exist. Everyone knows that in order to be a success in the United States or in life in general, you need to master English. You need to learn how to speak it, write it, and read it well. And having it protected as the official language, I think, is ludicrous.
I think it's just
absolutely insane.
And at a time when they're not doing their jobs already, this is a diversion.
Absolutely, Rick. We have so many more important issues on the table. We've got a budget impasse. We have disagreements on public pensions, on the state store system, on providing a meaningful solution to the unintended consequence in unemployment compensation. And, workers are hurting out there. People are struggling to make ends meet. They're losing their mortgages. They're not being able to make their car payments. Some people had to pull their kids out of college because they simply couldn't foot the bill and weren't eligible for student loans because their credit is maxed out. These are the things that we ought to be worrying about, not stupid pieces of paper that would make English the official language. I mean, that's just like saying we need to say that air has to be sanctioned as the official sustenance. You got to have air to breathe. I mean, it's absurd. We're living in the United States of America. English is always going to be the dominant language. The international language of business is English. The international language of diplomacy is English. Nowhere on the planet is it being threatened or under any kind of extinction. It is ludicrous, but it's red meat for the right wing when things are slow and when they ought to be doing other things, when they ought to be doing more pressing matters that the people of Pennsylvania actually care about, Rick. And I apologize for the rant, but I feel very strongly about it because, you know, this comes up every so often, and it solicits the same response, I have to say.
Well, I mean, it was better coming from you, because I would have said almost the same kind of stuff. It's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. It's a diversion. It's the shiny thing. It's what enrages the idiot doofus base. But, you know, it's what people like Warner and Metcalf and the rest of them, it's all they have.
Right. It's all they have, Rick, because they would rather put out this silliness than talk about real issues like public pension reform, like the state store situation, a severance tax on the Marcellus. I mean, these are the things that they ought to be talking about, and they ought to be worrying about a budget impasse, not passing silly pieces of legislation in between the action. I mean, nobody's buying this stuff except for a couple newspapers out west, which shall remain nameless because I really don't want to give them any props.
There you go.
But Rick, I mean, it's the same thing over and over again. At some point, you know, you got to put these kids away and bring the adults to the table, because I mean, it's just getting ridiculous out there, and it's getting worse, and it's getting more polarized, and we're not able to get anything done because of the silliness. And really, I mean, we have to demand more of our legislators, because I'll tell you what, that bill is not worth the paper that it's being printed on, bro.
But hey, it'll save $45.
It'll save $45.
That'll solve our budget problems. Because here's the sad reality. What we're almost 2 months into not having a budget, and I don't see any urgency to get anything done. What I see are gimmicks and tricks and nonsense.
That's exactly right, Rick. And you know, this is backfiring on the members of the General Assembly, because the recent Quinnipiac and the recent F&M poll, actually the Franklin Marshall poll is the one that determined that 54% of the electorate is blaming this impasse on the General Assembly and its inability to focus and come up with some sort of compromise with the governor. The governor's favorability numbers have not moved, and which is pretty astonishing to me, because I would have thought that he was going to get at least half of the blame,
take a hit,
half
right.
the credit, but no, it's the opposite. The 54% of those polled basically said that the impasse is the fault of the General Assembly and its inability to act accordingly and to get things done, roll up their sleeves and talk about important things, not like making English the official language of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, when you pull out the tired old dead horse as a distraction, you know you're struggling when you're pulling something like that out of the hat.
You know, you're right, Rick. It's boring. You know, I'm bored with this stuff. Why don't you come up with something creative to show that you have two brain cells in your head?
We could make 2015 the year of the Bible, like we did in 2012. We could do that. That would get people something, right?
You know, as they say in the South, God bless their hearts. Bless their hearts. Bless their hearts. I tell you, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, it's depressing after a while, because they ought to be doing more constructive things. I mean, let's talk about creating jobs. Let's talk about salvaging the middle class, which is really hurting. Let's talk about the pain that exists on a daily basis out there, man. I mean, there are people looking at their checking accounts this morning and they're in the red. Let's try to help those people instead of putting out ridiculous pieces of legislation that fires up, I mean, a few people, but at the end of the day, it doesn't produce anything in terms of anything of constructive, positive results. I mean, it's ridiculous. It really is.
Because the people that you're talking about, the ones that are struggling to get by, those people speak English too.
Of course they do. And many of them don't speak it well. Let's help them. Why don't we put some money into our public education system so these folks could learn how to speak English correctly and be articulate and be productive members of society? Why don't we do that instead of putting out this tripe in terms of pieces of paper that glorify nonsense? That's what this is. And I love the English language. I adore it. I mean, I studied it. I have a degree in journalism. I have a master's degree. I mean, I flourish and I just grab any opportunity to speak, coherently on any issue. And I just love it. And I wish more people had that passion to help others learn and master the English language as well as anybody else. Because Rick, it's frustrating.
I don't know. I ain't got me absolutely no thoughts on stuff like that, man. I don't know what you'd be talking about. No, I'm being silly. But the reality is, you're right. Education. We should be spending money on this, and I don't see with this budget. I just don't see the will on the Republicans. And my fear, Abe, and you're the guy who's walking around the Capitol talking to these people. My fear is we've turned into DC already.
That's right, Rick. Listen, I get demoralized when I talk to some of these legislators because they're pointing fingers as to where I should go next rather than accepting responsibility and accountability for what's taken place. And sometimes I hear this with chairs, committees. Well, I have to wait for this person to move. I have to wait for that person to move. And we're really looking for the Senate to take a lead on this, or we're looking for the House to take a lead on this. And, I've had meetings with leaders who basically say, well, we're not going to get anything done until this budget impasse is taking place. And I'm speaking specifically about unemployment compensation, but you really can multitask in this business, Rick. You really can be addressing things that help poor people and help working people.
Not these ideologues. They can't walk and chew gum. Come on.
Wow.
One thing, sole single-minded focus. If it's not what's right in the plate given to them, they can't think two things at once. It's only what's handed to them and what's right in front of them. If they don't have the bullet points, man, trouble.
That's right. If they can't read off that sheet, if they can't memorize it in little bite-sized sentences, 30-second sound bites, 15-second sound bites, doesn't make sense to them. So much for making English the official language. Huh?
There you go. So let me ask you about the unemployment. I saw that you had testified in front of Scott Wagner up in Erie. And what I took away from the testimony that that hearing brought is that it's not just the workers who are saying, hey, unemployment's broken. It's the employers who are going, hey, we're losing workers. Nobody wants to come and work for us because they know they're going to get laid off 6 months of the year.
You better believe it. Contractors are squawking as loudly as we are, Rick, because they can't keep people. I mean, I know people who've turned down overtime on projects because they know they're not going to qualify for unemployment compensation because they're going to make too much money in a single quarter. That's a terrible statement. I mean, we should all be embracing work. We should all be embracing the opportunity to earn overtime. I mean, making money to feed your family and provide for them is a good thing. But under this current system, the ham and eggers, well, they feel the pain. They're not encouraged to go out and give their best in terms of finding more work because they know that they're going to pay for it in the end. That's a broken system, a very broken system. And that has to end. And the contractors are squawking just as loudly as the workers are, Rick. And I think that's good. And that's putting pressure on the Senate Labor and Industry Committee. It's putting pressure on the Senate. It's putting pressure on the House. And earlier in the week, I relayed that message to the Majority Leader, Dave Reed, who's shown a sincere interest in fixing unemployment compensation because it's not just union members, but non-union members are impacted as well. And like you said, the business owners are impacted. The workers are impacted. So there's got to be some sort of compromise, some common sense solution to tinkering with the percentages and fixing some of the things that were broken under Act 60. And of course, look, Rick, we're pragmatic people. We know it's not going to go back to everything the old system was giving us. But I mean, we can demand and ask for more things because I'll tell you, the words unintended consequence get thrown around. But let me tell you, Corbett knew exactly what he was doing.
Absolutely.
There was nothing unintended about that concept.
And so did Scott Perry when I had him on the program, and we went through all of this. And he swore, none of that's going to happen. This is going to be great. We're going to save money. And I go, your savings is stealing from people's wages. Because understand, and this is the last line of questioning, because, I say we should be fighting for better and more robust unemployment insurance compensation so that if we have another downturn, we don't end up in a depression-like situation because it was unemployment, it was food stamps, it was all of those safety net programs that saved this nation from total and utter collapse due to the Bush administration's just insanity of not taking care of what they should have been doing their entire term. That collapse in 2008 could have been a depression without these programs.
That's exactly right. Exactly right, which is sound public policy to take care of the most vulnerable people so then society doesn't go to hell in a handbasket in 25 seconds. I mean, having those programs in place and having them efficiently run will help us in a significant downturn. It's just a matter of time before the next one comes up again. We know it's going to happen. This is all cyclical. So why don't we take care of those programs, fund them at the right level so that they can take care of people to avoid a catastrophe, an ultimate catastrophe.
There you go. Abe Amoros, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Rick. Thank you for having me.
Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
No matter to me, as long as we can live in harmony. Why can't we be friends?
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Good news about obesity. A new scientific organization is coming to grips with this bulging national problem. Called the Global Energy Balance Network, it comes at obesity from a unique perspective, namely that the key to controlling one's weight is not cutting back on calorie consumption, but committing to a regular program of exercise. Great, huh? You can literally have your cake and eat it too. Before you swallow GEBN's approach, however, note that nearly all scientists on the obesity beat say the opposite. Exercise is a minimal contributor to weight loss compared to putting fewer calories in the tank. So what's behind the contrarian new group? Coca-Cola. Yes, Global Energy Balance Network was created and is financed by the world's leading purveyor of sugary sodas. And Coke is also the leading purveyor of empty-calorie science, trying to convince us that its bottled bombs of obesity have no bad effects on human health. The corporate giant's latest scientific fraud is prompted by corporate panic. Sales of full-calorie sodas have plummeted by 25% in the past 2 decades as public health campaigns have ratcheted up to warn of cola's dangers. Consequently, obesity rates, especially for young children, are down. And Coca-Cola now lists obesity concerns by the public as the #1 threat to its business. The choice between your health and the health of their corporate profits is an easy decision for Coke's top executives. So they're trying this trick play to shift the obesity blame from their calories to your lack of exercise. This is Jim Hightower saying, next they'll be promoting the Coca-Cola workout plan. Do several repetitions of 12-ounce elbow bends each day with cans of Coca-Cola, and keep your heart strong by briskly striding to the fridge to grab each can. Remember, every repetition adds up.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Well, Brownie's out defending himself. That's it. Doing a heck of a job there, Brownie, defending yourself. Nice job. And I love this, that Brownie has said that Bush loved him so much, gave him a nickname. My first thought when I read that, that George really thought highly of Brownie, that he gave him a nickname. You think of the 2 other that are very popular nicknames that Bush gave away. There was Turd Blossom, which was Karl Rove, which that doesn't sound very positive to me. And then there's Balloon Foot, which was Colin Powell. Understand, Colin Powell, during Vietnam, evidently stepped on one of these punji sticks, which were really sharpened sticks that they covered up with leaves, so that when you fell into the hole that they dug and stuck these sticks up, they took these pointy sticks and they rubbed them with feces and all kinds of stuff so that you'd get an infection, which he did. And Bush mocked. You figure that out because I can't. So when I hear Brownie, I'm thinking, wait a second, there's nothing positive there. Makes me think that you're brown nose. That heck of a job there, brown nose. Just my thought. But interesting that Brownie goes to say that he wanted to leave FEMA after the 2004 hurricane season. He wanted to go, but his loyalty to President Bush kept him. He wished he'd gone. He wished he'd left. Man, I wished, because my life would be so much different. I wouldn't be that guy who completely screwed up the response to Hurricane Katrina. I wouldn't be that guy. Now, what he does in this piece is he goes and he says, it's the Democratic governor, Blanco. It's the Democratic mayor, Ray Nagin. It's their fault. And while I will agree that it is their fault that they didn't get the people out, it was his job to respond to the damn thing. That's the reality.
Did you see what Donna Brazil said today?
No.
She's the secretary over at the DNC. She actually said that the Bush and FEMA actually did a good job.
Nice.
Looking back on it 10 years later.
Good. Nice job, Donna.
Well, she is from New Orleans, but she said they did what they had to do.
Yeah. Well, to me, the initial response was lacking in everyone that I spoke to. They were not prepared. Like, now you go back to 2004, and this is where I judge them. In Florida, which was a swing state, one that the Bush administration needed to win to become president again, there were resources on the ground already ready for what they knew was coming. They had people in position. They had all of the things that they knew they were going to need, boats and all kinds of stuff.
I think this is what, Hurricane Charlie?
Well, there were a couple of them, but I think Charlie was one of them.
Because I was in Florida at that point, actually coming home.
I think it was Ivan and Francis as well.
I was coming home from Disney World for one of those hurricanes because we were leaving the day of. We were driving back. And all I remember seeing coming down 95 were just all these trucks, all these supplies trucks for at least like 4 or 5 hours from like all different states heading down to Florida to be ready for the storm.
Yep. That didn't happen here because you had a Democratic governor, you had a Democratic mayor. So it was like, well, let them swim. And they knew that those levees couldn't withstand a hurricane of that magnitude. They knew it, but they did nothing to prepare. So they're blaming poor people who didn't have the resources to get the hell out of Dodge. They're blaming them. And he goes on to blame Nagin for saying, hey, if you can't leave, jump into the Superdome, which was like the last place they could, but that didn't work out too well either. So it's blame everybody but blame Brownie. And maybe Brownie should have quit. Or better yet, maybe Brownie shouldn't have been there at all.
He was the equestrian guy, right?
Yeah, he was the guy who knew horses. And if you need someone if you need a proctology exam for a horse, Brownie's the guy to call. If you need a hurricane response, maybe not so much. Just my thought. But you can take a look at the piece over at Politico. He's been sending it around, trying to, I guess, clean his name up, and maybe he'll do a better job responding to that than he did to the hurricane there in New Orleans today, the 10th anniversary. Or I don't even know if anniversary is the right word. Anyway, let's take a quick break. Right back with Hour 3. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. 10 years on from the Hurricane Katrina disaster, social justice groups are still working in the Gulf region to overcome decades of social and economic injustice. Martha Bergmark of the Mississippi Center for Justice reflects on the hurricane and the social justice struggle that occurred in its wake.
Hard to really imagine, in a way, just how cataclysmic it was, and yet it was an event that really peeled back the layers on social justice problems that have plagued our region forever. In trying to recover from this terrible disaster, we had an opportunity to try to do it in a way that was more equitable, more fair to some of the hurricane's most vulnerable survivors. So 10 years later, we see a region that has recovered in many ways, I think because of the work of civil legal aid and social justice partners across the region. And yet we did not change the underlying reality that, hundreds of years of well-entrenched policy and practice have put in place. We still are a region that is our nation's poorest, where folks at the bottom of the ladder have the biggest struggles.
Bergmark says that the civil legal aid she mentioned is critical for poor and working people if they are to get social and economic justice.
If folks at the bottom of the economic spectrum can't have access to legal help just right there along with all the other sort of first response kind of needs that have to be met. There just needs to be a recognition that legal help is first and foremost at near the top of the list.
The Bank of Labor is raising wages, joining the AFL-CIO effort to put more money in workers' pockets. The Bank of Labor says it's setting a minimum wage of $15 an hour for its employees. Bank of Labor is based in Kansas City, Kansas, and has an office in Washington, D.C. Workers there are members of the United Mine Workers. The bank and the UMWA both embraced the AFL-CIO call to raise wages. The Bank of Labor was founded and is majority-owned by the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, iron ship builders, blacksmiths, forgers, and helpers. Bank of Labor CEO Newton Jones says that the AFL-CIO's Raising Wages campaign benefits all workers, union and non-union alike, by setting a standard to which all employers should aspire. Through such initiatives, he says, we can help restore the middle class. Workers Independent News is made possible in part through underwriting support from OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. If you like this labor news, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and visit us at laborradio.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Where common sense, reason, and community come together. The Rick Smith Show.
Now, people, because together we will stand, every boy, every girl, and a man.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Big weekend this weekend, and I'm looking forward to hearing what comes out of it. Our friends over at Keystone Progress going to have their North by Northwest up in Erie. They're going to have the likes of Katie McGinty and Joe Sestak. They're going to show up and maybe have a discussion also, some of the Supreme Court candidates. This is a historic year. 3 openings on the Supreme Court could change the direction of Pennsylvania for the next generation, for the next 50 years, if you will. So there's so much importance on this election. But I also, the 2016 senatorial race, that's a big one too. Here to talk about the big North by Northwest Summit, I've asked John Neurer. He's communication director over at Keystone Progress. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me again, Rick.
So, big summit. What kind of turnout are we expecting up in Erie this weekend?
Well, we're expecting 100 to 150 people up here, and this is sort of it's a mini version of what we do every year in Harrisburg with the Pennsylvania Progressive Summit, which, by the way, the 2016 Pennsylvania Progressive Summit, Saturday, February 20th. Saturday, February 20th, so put it on your calendars. So that's an event that we have been doing in Harrisburg. I think this past year was maybe our 5th year doing that. And so this is actually the second time that we've sort of taken it on the road to do a mini summit up here in Erie. We did it in 2013. So it's a really good way for us to connect with some folks here in the community in Northwest PA who might not necessarily make the trek all the way down to Harrisburg for the Progressive Summit. And we actually have a staffer on the ground, an organizer, working on a number of different issues here in Erie. So it's a great way for us also to sort of amplify some of the organizing work that's happening here through Keystone Progress on the ground.
So now when McGinty and Sestak are going to be there, the 2016, so far, Democratic candidates to take on Toomey, is this kind of like a debate forum? Are they just going to give speeches? You got like a cage or something they can duke it out in? What's going on there?
Okay, so this is actually the first event where they are appearing at the same event. This is the first time they are at the same event in the same day. Now, they are appearing because of schedule conflicts. They are appearing at 2 different times. So here's what's interesting. What we actually have to do is Admiral Sestak will be there in the morning. And so we're going to take questions from the audience. What we actually have to do is take those same questions and ask the exact same questions at the lunchtime plenary when Katie McGinty's there. So it is not technically a debate where they're on the same stage at the same time, face to face, but they're answering the same questions. So you sort of look at it holistically, and it kind of is a debate, right? You have the same people that will be in the audience for the morning session and the lunchtime session. They'll be able to hear how each of the candidates answers exactly the same question. So we're excited about that. We're really happy that they both actually had to move things around to make sure that they could get here. But it's a great opportunity, I think, for everybody, the audience members especially, to hear how they're answering the same question.
Yeah, and then as someone who's creative in video stuff, you could probably put it next to each other and make it look like an actual debate.
Well, you absolutely could, and we will. That's a fantastic idea. I think, again, like I said, because this is the first time that they're at the same venue for the same event, and so there aren't things occurring in the news between when they're answering similar kinds of questions. I think it'll be great. I think it's a great opportunity, and we're really, really looking forward to it.
And if you want to check out the website and you want to check out the big summit, nxnwsummit.org. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. You can check out the North by Northwest Summit that the good folks at Keystone Progress are putting on. To me, the big, outside of Sestak and McGinty, which, that's well down the road. I'm looking to this November. We're looking at a historic opportunity to change the complexion of the Supreme Court, to maybe we get some sanity on it. There are 3 openings, as I understand, and you're going to have, I guess, 2 or 3 of them, two or three of the Democratic folks who are going to show up.
Yeah, Judge Weck and Judge Donahue are scheduled to speak tomorrow as well, and you're absolutely right, and this is a real challenge, I think, because it's an off year. And that, in general, is difficult to get people excited to get out and vote. In 2016, in the presidential year, it's not that difficult. But I think you are alluding to a very important point, which is, frankly, when it comes to policy here in Pennsylvania and laws here in Pennsylvania, and the kind of Pennsylvania that we will be living in and our kids will be living in for the next decade plus, this year's elections are more, you could say are more important, or at least just as important as the elections in 2016, because the Supreme Court term, the 10-year term that they get when they win, they really can change the entire complexion, the way that the state is run, the laws and things that happen in Pennsylvania. And but this year with 3 vacancies, it's swinging the court. It is what kind of state Supreme Court are we going to have? So it's critically important, and we are really looking forward to being able to hear what these candidates have to say about why they want to be elected to the state Supreme Court.
Yeah, I just heard the other day, this is the first time that there have been 3 vacancies on the court since like the early 1700s. That's how rare this, I guess just one other time, and it was like 1704, 1707 or something like that.
Well, and think about this in the context of the federal Supreme Court. And just in the last couple years, the magnitude of sort of the ramifications of the rulings that the federal Supreme Court have made on issues like Obamacare and same-sex marriage. Well, the state Supreme Court really is, doing the same thing for laws passed by our, frankly, right now, terrible legislature here.
Think voter ID.
Think about voter ID. Think about something like Act 13
and
fracking in Pennsylvania. And that it was a conservative Supreme Court, frankly, here in Pennsylvania, that struck down large portions of Act 13 a couple of years back. So you have an opportunity, unlike the federal Supreme Court, where you have to wait for a vacancy because of lifetime appointments, and you just never know when that's going to happen. You have an opportunity in one day to flip control of that court for, the foreseeable future. That's huge.
Yeah, I mean, especially as we're looking down the future at privacy rights, as we're looking down the future at workers' rights, consumer rights, all of these things that come up. And I got to be honest, you look at gerrymandering. 2020 is going to be another gerrymandering year if the Republicans have their choice. You're going to need a court who's at least somewhat rational as they look at that.
there's no doubt about it. And you know, there the map as currently constituted, because of gerrymandering, makes it very difficult for Democrats to be able to take back control of the state legislature. So it's almost sort of a chicken and the egg problem, I guess you could say, with the maps. But again, what you're able to do on one single day is flip control of the Supreme Court and at least have a more reasonable conversation then after 2020, if Democrats don't take control, about what the map should look like. So, and you know what, you're absolutely right. And I know you've talked a lot about this. It sort of feels like sometimes you're getting down in the weeds when you talk about redistricting and what the maps look like. But I don't, there's not any one single issue that is more critical to the kinds of laws that we pass here in Pennsylvania than redistricting and who gets to say in what those maps look like.
Yep. No, I mean, I live in the 30th senatorial district. Actually, I live in the gas cloud that is the 30th senatorial district. And if you look at it on the map, you ever seen on the back of like pickup trucks, you've got the little kid who's, urinating on something.
Yeah, I do.
It looks like that kid who's just blown some gas out. I live in the cloud in the back. How they drew that, I'm telling you, look it up. It's hysterical looking. How they drew that, I have no idea, but it's kind of funny looking.
Yeah, well, and I remember I went to school in upstate New York, and and in New York, frankly, it's the Democrats who have done the same thing for redistricting and after redistricting. And I remember I lived in a district that the shape of the district was just unbelievable, ridiculous, because they had to draw. Upstate New York is gigantic when you look on the map, and they had to draw one little college town into part of this district that was, I think the district stretched for, 220 miles or something ridiculous from north to south because of that. But both parties do it. There's no question. And I think you could have a much longer conversation about how some states, they have independent commissions that draw these maps, and maybe that's the way to go. But in the end, as long as the rules are the way that they are, for folks like us, we would much rather have a more progressive, left-leaning court that has to make a decision on whether or not the maps are fair.
I'm with you. So let's move on. But if folks want to go to the big summit, still time to get tickets. All of that, the website, nxnwsummit.org.
That's right. And you should, if you want to go, and we'd love to have you, try to go today and sign up, because we have limited space. It's not a huge room, so we need you to do that now, because we're not going to be able to do registration at the door. So that's an important thing. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
So make sure that you get there, because you want to see the Admiral, you want to see Katie McGinty, you want to see the judicial candidates, also some of the plenaries and the breakout stuff that I think is important as well. I did want to ask you about the budget before I let you go. There's some shenanigans, craziness. Representative Warner today, I guess, came out with the English-only legislation. He wants to, again, make the Commonwealth an English-only state. You got Representative Bloom doing a radio program, doing some free work while they take off instead of actually doing their job. Kind of interesting. Thoughts on the budget?
What is the circus that's going on in Harrisburg right now? This is just, it's crazy. And to me, here's the bottom line. Because a lot of this is just, rhetoric that we have to sort of parse through right now. But very soon, and it's already happening in some places, but very soon, Pennsylvanians are going to start to feel the effects of not having a budget. And that's with public services who aren't getting the funding that they would normally get from the state. It is with school districts who, frankly, usually around Labor Day every year, there's a check that comes from the state to a lot of school districts. They're not going to get that. So you're going to start to feel real effects. And I think I hope that's when some of the circus will end and cooler heads will prevail, and we will start to have a real conversation about what are reasonable solutions to this budget impasse right now. So, and that's coming soon. It's going to start to happen, and hopefully the debate shifts in that case.
Are you surprised by the latest numbers by the FNM poll that have put the responsibility or the blame, if you will, into the seats of the Republican legislatures in the General Assembly. Are you surprised that, because I think F&M came, and the Daily News came out with it, said 54% of the voters look at the Republicans in the General Assembly as the problem, while only 29% look at the governor.
Well, I think that's sort of a component of a couple things. One, I think that at least some of that is people recognizing who is really holding things up here, because the Republicans in essence have, and we've talked about this before, but they presented what was basically a fifth Corbett budget, and that was rejected resoundingly by the voters when Governor Corbett was not reelected. That's number one, and I think number two is the other thing is the Republicans are they have a majority, so for most people, the most immediate elected official that they're dealing with in their district are Republicans. So, I think that I think that's an encouraging sign. I think that it's also a sign that that Governor Wolf and his administration have done a good job, at least to this point, in explaining why there isn't a deal yet and why the components of their budget are important, and they're holding fast to those. So, but again, when people really start to feel it, and that's coming soon, I think the dynamics change a little bit in Harrisburg.
It'll be interesting because I'm here in end of October, early November before anything gets done, which could be devastating. I just wanted to get one reaction with today being the 10th anniversary of the tragedy there and the catastrophe in New Orleans. Curious your thoughts on doing a heck of a job there, Brownie, since he's out there, op-edding himself into, hey, it wasn't me, it was those guys.
When you have people who hate government in charge of government, inevitably you're going to run into problems. And the consequences in Katrina were catastrophic. And we're talking about loss of life. We're talking about people losing their homes. We're talking about, not getting the relief they need when they've been displaced. But I think it's just, again, it is a result of people who have a disdain for government, but then we elect them to be in charge of government. And regardless of sort of how much you think the government should be part of our lives, there are times like that, like Katrina, when I think that we can almost all agree across the board, government has an important role. And you have to have competent people who believe that government plays a vital role in people's lives being in charge. That's just the bottom line to me.
Yeah. But I'm still loving the rewriting. Just is what it is. But John, I appreciate you taking a little time for us, and good luck this weekend. And I hope all things go really well.
Thank you very much, Rick. I look forward to talking to you about it soon.
All righty. Thanks so much. John Newrohr, Communication Director over at Keystone Progress. You want to check out the summit, nxnwsummit.org. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on John's name. Take you right there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1963. That was the day of one of the most iconic stands for justice and equality in United States history. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech to 250,000 people in Washington, D.C. But did you know the official title for that history-making event was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom? The popular memory of the March on Washington focuses on the fight for freedom, especially the right for Black Americans to access public spaces and the voting booth. But the march organizers also understood that economic justice was a fundamental part of this broader call for freedom. As Dr. King once famously asked, "What good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger?" This emphasis on the importance of jobs and economic justice perhaps was most represented by A. Philip Randolph. He was one of the lead organizers of the 1963 March on Washington. Randolph was the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the nation's first national African-American union. Starting in World War I, Randolph fought for an end to employment discrimination. His efforts in planning the March on Washington were an extension of that earlier work. Organized labor had a mixed response to the march. The AFL-CIO did not endorse the march. Walter Reuther, head of the United Auto Workers, shared the stage in Washington, D.C. with Dr. King and A. Philip Randolph that day. It is important to remember the connection between the call for civil rights and the demand for the right to employment, fair wages, and dignity at the workplace.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about how a championship boxing match and the winner's attitudes and actions changed America. Muhammad Ali continued to challenge American norms, including refusal to fight in Vietnam. He was for many years a polarizing figure, but he made us think and he made us change, whether you respect him or not. Like any other game changer, he also had good timing. He came on the scene at the beginning of the TV era when everyone could hear and see him. Ali was the first end zone dancer, the first trash talker. He freed black athletes and entertainers to be themselves and to remove boundaries. And as historian Anthony Chesborough says, the Clay Liston fight forced white Americans to reconsider their views about blacks. Ali was a scary black man only because he was attacking the system. And that he was. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
EPI has a new study out, the Economic Policy Institute, that you can check out, talking about what it costs a family of four to have what they quote as a decent living. And I guess that would mean, having a decent house to live, somewhere where the kids can, have a room, and somewhere you can put a kitchen table and sit down to dinner, that you can have health care, you can have access to quality education, a bunch of this stuff, transportation expenses, food costs, health care, all of this. And what they came up with is in Pittsburgh, for instance, you would need about $5,400 each and every month just to have a decent standard of living. Philadelphia, upwards of $6,400 a month. New York City was the most expensive, obviously, where they said, and the annual income of two-child family would be, somewhere around $98,000 just to afford those things. And, the question then becomes, most people I know who live in New York don't make $98,000 a year, just like most people I know in Philadelphia don't make $76,000. What do you then give up? Is it the child care? Is it the health care? Is it the education? Is it the transportation? What is it? And that's one of those things where you start going, what's the argument against raising the minimum wage? Because the Chamber of Commerce will tell you, $7.25 is okay. If you raise that, it'll be the end. And what they've got over there is at the EPI, and we got a link at the Facebook page. They've got a calculator that, help you do a little budgeting, find out what in your area, kind of where things are. You do the city state thing and it'll tell you, how you stack up with the rest of the country, what kind of things you need, what kind of numbers there are. For instance, where I live in the Harrisburg area, they say, just to have the average, just decent lifestyle, you're talking about almost $5,600 or $67,000 a year. Because they throw in about $850 for housing, food about $800, childcare being the just outrageous, most expensive, which is why, to be honest, my wife doesn't work. Other than I don't want someone else raising my kids, childcare is outrageous. Healthcare, pretty high up there, and taxes and all kinds of other things. You're talking almost $5,600 a month just to have a decent living. Now I've got 3 kids, so that number obviously goes higher, as it would for other areas as well. But it kind of gives you this idea that we've been falling behind for at least the last generation, probably 2. We've been falling behind that standard of a middle class. We've been falling behind that work being rewarded through decent wages and the ability to afford those things like healthcare, like pensions. I had an interesting conversation the other day. A friend of mine's going into the financial services business. He's retiring from the job he has now. And he says, I think I'm gonna start my own financial services kind of thing. I'm gonna do some consulting and help people, because there's a retirement crisis coming. And people need to be aware that, policy isn't going to be there. You've got too many Republicans and corporate Democrats who are saying, no, we don't need to increase Social Security. We don't need to hold employers accountable. We don't need to do that stuff. It's you, the individual. And he says, look, we've got to be telling people that they need to save a little bit. And he says, I'm going to provide the vehicle for folks to take a very little bit of money and squirrel it away for that rainy day, and how to save themselves, a retirement time that should be, the golden years, save them from what will be heartache and poverty. Now, as a policy guy, I look at what's gone on and what's been allowed to happen as a failure. We've continued to vote for these politicians who, honestly, for a lack of a better word or phrase, they hate government. They despise we the people. They care about themselves. Hooray for me. Screw you. And not us as a society. Talk about it. Oh, love the churches. But when you talk about the whole society, not so much, especially poor people, especially minority people, especially women. You start going back to that whole original intent thing, kind of makes you wonder. One party in this country has been co-opted by insanity. Absolute, total insanity. We don't have a budget here in Pennsylvania, yet the Republicans have all the time in the world. Hey, let's pursue the English only thing. Nuts. Just plain nuts. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit of the news from Talk Radio News Service. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
I'll never bend. I'm with you now. Until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with the heart. The voice of the working class. Rick Smith.
It is just mind-boggling to watch this happening.
A lot of flooding all over the city.
Buildings have collapsed. There are reports from New Orleans of people trapped in buildings, but there could be far worse still to come.
The 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
And it's very likely to get worse in the future.
NASA warns at least 3 feet of sea level rise now locked in. Obama heads to the Arctic to highlight global warming. Plus,
it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Switching to clean energy will cost less than fossil fuels in the long run, says Citibank.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
There is no perfect source of energy. Every one of them has a downside. Solar is great, but solar takes huge amounts of water.
Oh, Carly Fiorina, you are darling. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I remember it like it was yesterday, unfortunately. The day that Hurricane Katrina came ashore 10 years ago this week.
Yes, Hurricane Katrina was the powerful hurricane that wrought devastation across much of the Gulf Coast, but drowned the city of New Orleans. Back in 2005, we were broadcasting live from the anti-war protests at the Bush Ranch in Crawford, Texas, when the frightening National Weather Service alert came across the wires.
It's actually from the National Weather Service, a most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille of '69.
Oh, my.
Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks.
Katrina's ferocity was the first that many in the public had ever heard of global warming. But the real cause of the devastation was the oil and gas industry's decades-long destruction of Louisiana's storm buffering wetlands, plus the shoddy levee system built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to hold back the ocean, created the conditions that allowed Katrina's storm surge to flood the city, killing an estimated 1,800 people. Hurricane Katrina changed the face of New Orleans forever. The costliest hurricane yet in the U.S. Its heartbreaking aftermath exposed our nation's deep vulnerability to disasters. Resilience to the accelerating impacts of global warming is also the core message of what the White House is labeling President Obama's climate change tour. After skewering the oil industry for its anti-free market efforts to kill clean energy in Nevada, and then commemorating Katrina's devastation in New Orleans, Obama goes to the Arctic Circle, the first sitting American president to do so. The goal of the trip is to help Americans and the corporate news media confront the fact that climate change is not some distant threat, but is impacting Americans right now.
You know, it'd be a hell of a lot easier for the president to do that had he just not given the final approval to Shell Oil to drill in that very same Arctic.
Obama will be visiting coastal villages in Alaska that are having to relocate away from the surging ocean, even while the permafrost melts beneath them. Now, some impacts are unavoidable. NASA confirms this week that sea level rise continues to accelerate thanks to global warming. Moreover, in this study, they say, quote, "It is pretty certain we're locked into at least 3 feet of sea level rise and probably more." In other words, they say it's not a question of if, but when.
Well, when? Do they give a timeline for any of this?
They don't. They say they don't have the data yet to be able to estimate when this will all happen. They said it could be 100 years. It could be less. Meanwhile, a new economic report finds that the cost of moving to clean energy would be cheaper than our current fossil fuel-based economy. The detailed economic analysis from banking giant Citigroup finds that over the next 30 years, the cost of transitioning to clean energy is about the same as what the world would have spent on fossil fuels anyway over the same period of time.
Oh, those lefty tree huggers at Citibank.
And they say we would save billions, if not trillions of dollars, avoiding the risk of disasters from global warming impacts. On the broadcast this week, environmental journalist David Roberts of Vox.com said the Citigroup researchers were so stunned by their results, they concluded their report with a simple question.
Do you do the same thing you're doing at enormous risk, or do you take this alternative route, which costs about the same and avoids this enormous risk? They basically say, like, why would you not do this? Like, it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Why would you not do that? Hey, Citibank, have you met what has become of the U.S. Congress? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. You can download our reports anytime via iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans and miss it each night and day?
Most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Still loving the Brownie rewriting. I wanted to leave in 2004, but I loved my boss because he gave me a really great nickname, like Brownie. Yeah, that's. I got to tell you, I'm still not buying the Brownie was a positive thing. You go back to Turd Blossom, you go back to Balloon Foot. You just kind of look at the track record. Brownie was a bad thing. I'm thinking brown nose. Just my thought. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So
yes, Ellen Ratner, our friend, is down cavorting with George Bush, I must say, in Mississippi, unless the Secret Service has drug her off by now. I don't know.
Well, Ellen's always had kind of a good relationship with Bush. I remember I went to her 60th birthday party, and her brother had paid someone to do a documentary about her. And there was a photo of George, of Laura, of Ellen and Ellen's wife. And there's a V between Ellen and Laura Bush. Because as Ellen told me, as soon as they were about to snap the picture, Laura Bush moved away from her.
That film was called Force of Nature. And Ellen, yeah, she likes Bush for a couple of reasons. She said he's done a lot in Africa with the HIV issue, and he did, he's paid attention. He's down there in Mississippi. So, but I was just teasing her, not to get arrested by Secret Service while she's down there. But this is the 10th anniversary. I must say, with the Brownie incident, good job, Brownie, with Brown, the head of FEMA. Bush flew the Air Force One over Louisiana, and Rick, not only down there because they put effigies of him in parades for years, but nationally, Rick, if you look historically at the polling, he never recovered from that nationally. He never did.
No, you saw him out of touch.
Yeah, he never recovered from it. It was always there and hurt him in the stance with a lot of people. President Obama, of course, was in New Orleans yesterday, and he kind of made it a home style thing in the sense that he went to some individual places, didn't have a huge type of deal in a stadium or any such thing. So he kind of made it a home style. And then he did say that there's, a lot of work to do and crime and things to work on and opportunities for young people. So
yeah, we were just there. We were just in New Orleans here about a week ago. And, I was there, several months after the hurricane. With a junket of people, doing some media work, and the places that were washed away and the homes that were devastated, they've all been removed, and now it's like open space because the poor people they're not back. And I look at that op-ed the woman at the Chicago Tribune wrote, saying that why can't we have our Hurricane Katrina in Chicago to get rid of our poor people and those teachers unions.
We had I did a hearing in New Orleans with Maxine Waters. We were the first hearing to ever officially be held down there because they hadn't held one. Hastert, the Speaker of the House, hadn't held one. So after we held it, they got some bad publicity, and he went down and did one. But we held that hearing, and at that time there was what was called red tagging, and we were digging into that. There was this red tagging where the big rich developers, now we find out with Ray Nagin, the mayor, but the big rich developers, they didn't want people back in those areas. Nope. They wanted that land to use it for corporate purposes.
And, we were just down there and they were saying, some of the areas that were devastated have now, the property values have like quadrupled because, as you've said, the poor people didn't come back and the builders redeveloped and brought in people with money, and they've really serviced the wealth. They've serviced the wealth well. And, it just is what it is. And I look at this and it's one of those anniversaries that you kind of go, nothing good here for me. Yep. But the contractors, the people who made millions and millions of dollars, the charter schools who've taken over their education system, they've done very well in it.
Mississippi was a different ball of wax. They redeveloped some projects for people. Mississippi just went, I think, a different direction. But we were trying to expose that, Maxine Waters and I, the congresswoman from California, my ranking member, because we went down there specifically to try to bust through what was going on with this housing, deal. But it's an anniversary commencement that I'm the same way as you. I'm looking at it going, well, I don't know. Yes, it's good to rebuild places, but I'm not sure how it was rebuilt.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I mean, because you usually have an interesting perspective on things. Was it Brownie's fault? I mean, does he share blame in this? Because in his article over at Politico, he says it was Blanco and it was Nagin, which, rightly so, they have responsibility of not getting people out, not doing some evacuation. But in the aftermath, isn't it his job?
Well, yes, because I mean, I remember clips. Now, we had trouble with Ray Nagin because I asked him to come to my committee, and he was angry. He was angry at Maxine Waters and I, and he was fighting down there with everybody. But I must say, I remember the clips very clearly where he begged people to leave. He did do that. So it's not where he told people to stay. Mayor Nagin did beg people to leave. But I feel that after it all happened, no matter who left or when or didn't leave or whatever, FEMA is the one that has the total, charge to try to make things as right as possible. And we uncovered, Maxine and I, thousands of trailers and off-sites that weren't given to people. They were sitting somewhere else.
Yeah.
But they were purchased by the government. Rick, I can go on and on and on. And some of the stuff I've forgotten, but we uncovered a lot of horrible problems. So I believe he has a lot to blame in the aftermath.
I'm with you.
Of response.
A lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. One of my the last thing on this, one of my favorite stories, a guy who was a trash hauler told me that he had gotten the contract, and he was the guy at the bottom of the trash heap, so to speak. But the contract was given for, I think, some outrageous number, like $47 a ton. And by the time it was subcontracted and hashed out here, the guy who actually did the work was doing it for like $3 a ton. And it was just all of this grift and all of this, you had all of these corporate hands, just grabbing and taking and filling their pockets and not actually doing anything.
Right.
Yeah, it's well, it is what it is. Let's move on. I guess another hurricane moving its way towards tropical storm, I guess. It's not a hurricane yet, is it? Coming through Florida?
Not yet. And I just talked to a Florida station. They're not sure how this is going to come out. The mayor warned people to prepare for 3 days, but they're just not sure right now. But they're bracing for it in South Florida in particular. Erica, they've named it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right in the area where I'm going to be going to spend Christmas in a couple of months. Let's hope it doesn't get torn up. And hopefully we'll have a better response. What's going on with the Iran deal? Going to happen? Yes or no?
The president's going to win, but I've got to tell you, $30 million was spent during the August recess, and everybody that didn't want the president to succeed on this felt that they were going to nail the president in August for sure. And a lot of Democratic members, even in red states, have survived the worst of this. There's internal, Rick, though, some really ugly, ugly things being said about Jerry Nadler. He's a Jewish member. He's supporting the president, and some really horrible things have been said to the point where the Jewish Anti-Defamation League has had to step in. Now, Ted Cruz, shockingly, invited Donald Trump to go to D.C. September the 9th and have this rally. Well, one of the reasons they're doing this is because the president right now is still winning on this deal. But, Rick, the rally, guess who's sponsoring the rally? The Tea Party affiliate, then the Zionist Organization of America. So the Zionist Organization of America is combined with the Tea Party affiliate. Now, what that does, in my opinion, if you're a Democratic member and you're undecided, you've looked at all the substance, and you see Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and the Tea Party, are rallying against the president, is that due to substance or politics? So I think indirectly they might provide the president a couple more votes he needs.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm with you on that. But, I look at the Cruz and Trump, rubbing elbows, and Cruz is not a dumb guy. He's got to think this is a way to help him catapult to the front of the presidential pack too, though, right?
Yes, because, Cruz is not going to make it as the front runner. I would predict that. But if he combines with Trump, there's a lot of thought, is he trying to angle for, vice president? Is he trying to angle for something else? This doesn't hurt Cruz to be associated with Trump right now because Trump's getting a lot more, points maybe Jeb, what's his last name? Maybe Jeb should have went out there and done it.
That would act. I got to tell you, I look at Jeb. He doesn't look like a guy who wants to run for president. He looks like a guy who someone said, this would be a good idea. Go ahead. And he just kind of looks like he's moving through the motions.
I'll tell you something to do. I found this fascinating. I've told all my friends, and they do it, and they call me up and say, you're right. The next time you see Jeb Bush on TV, turn the volume down and watch him. You watch his body motions and things. He seriously, he'll look to the side, he'll look down at his chest. He just doesn't want to be there. Somebody has forced him into this, and I don't think it's his mother. She made a comment, can't they find anybody beyond the Clintons and the Bushes? I think money people got him, Rick, and just said, you're going to do this.
Yeah. But you know, if I remember right, George had some weird body language as well when he was running.
Yeah, but he had more of a cocky type of body language. Jeb Bush just got one like, you're bothering me. What am I doing? Can I go home? What time is it?
Is it time for dinner
Really?
yet?
I've never seen a candidate. They can say what they want about Hillary Clinton and some of her, missteps here in the campaign. She at least seems like she wants the job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and they're doing everything they can do with the emails, and I'm waiting for Benghazi to come back, and I'm sure the blue dress will be brought up soon. Everything they throw at her, man.
I think October is she needs to go into the Congress when she testifies in October, Rick, and I mean, knock it out of the ballpark. And if she does that, that should stop the email hemorrhaging, really.
No, I understand. Bush and Trump have some history together, right?
This is more than I knew. This is juicy. This is a reporter's dream. Donald Trump, when he says Jeb's name in private, he says Jeb. He draws out the first name. And I guess about 2 years ago, he got so bad with the Republican state rep from Florida, who was Speaker of the House, that the rep had to be like, hey, please, we know Jeb, please don't say those things, the things Trump was saying at some event. And the other thing is, it's sort of like the Bushes look down on him. He's not one of the, long-time WASP inherited money guys, but actually Trump did inherit a company. Yeah. But they kind of look at Donald Trump as a second-class guy. I mean, it's just fascinating. I didn't realize this goes back for a couple of decades.
Wow, that's interesting.
And they said, number one, friends of Trump said, number one, he wants to be president, but number two, he doesn't want Jeb to be president. Maybe that's the reason he got in it.
That could be the motive, but
never know.
Did you see the story on that evidently Ivana claimed that Donald had the Hitler's speeches in a book next to his bedside?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, evidently. This is where when divorces become nasty, you get all of these idiotic statements. Evidently, a Vanity Fair article they did back in 1990 points out that Ivana claimed that he had the Führer's speeches, and he was talking about New Order and interesting. One of those things. Maybe be careful what you tell your wife, because you never know when it turns on you.
That's true.
Yes, sir. So, what else? Anything else going into the weekend?
No, that's about it. I mean, I think we covered most of it.
All righty. Well, we'll solve the world's problems on Monday.
Yes,
thanks, Bob.
sir.
Great talking
Have a good
with you.
weekend.
Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Good news about obesity. A new scientific organization is coming to grips with this bulging national problem. Called the Global Energy Balance Network, it comes at obesity from a unique perspective, namely that the key to controlling one's weight is not cutting back on calorie consumption, but committing to a regular program of exercise. Great, huh? You can literally have your cake and eat it too. Before you swallow GEBN's approach, however, note that nearly all scientists on the obesity beat say the opposite. Exercise is a minimal contributor to weight loss compared to putting fewer calories in the tank. So what's behind the contrarian new group? Coca-Cola. Yes, Global Energy Balance Network was created and is financed by the world's leading purveyor of sugary sodas. And Coke is also the leading purveyor of empty-calorie science, trying to convince us that its bottled bombs of obesity have no bad effects on human health. The corporate giant's latest scientific fraud is prompted by corporate panic. Sales of full-calorie sodas have plummeted by 25% in the past 2 decades as public health campaigns have ratcheted up to warn of cola's dangers. Consequently, obesity rates, especially for young children, are down. And Coca-Cola now lists obesity concerns by the public as the #1 threat to its business. The choice between your health and the health of their corporate profits is an easy decision for Coke's top executives. So they're trying this trick play to shift the obesity blame from their calories to your lack of exercise. This is Jim Hightower saying, next they'll be promoting the Coca-Cola workout plan. Do several repetitions of 12-ounce elbow bends each day with cans of Coca-Cola, and keep your heart strong by briskly striding to the fridge to grab each can. Remember, every repetition adds up.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. Greece has a new prime minister, the country's first female head of state. Vasiliki Thanou was previously the top judge on the Greek Supreme Court, and her caretaker government will take over on Friday. If all goes to plan, Thanou won't be in office for long. There are national elections scheduled for September 20th to choose a replacement for Alexis Tsipras of the Syriza party, who resigned last week after successfully negotiating a multi-year bailout for the country. The International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting that Iran has constructed a new building at its Parchin military facility. Parchin is not mentioned in a July 14th nuclear agreement, but monitors are wary of activity at a facility where they suspect nuclear weapons-related work may have occurred in the past. IAEA inspectors are due to publish a report in December in an attempt to clear up exactly what Iran has been up to in recent years, and they worry new construction could be used to obscure evidence. And Tolkien fans, it's time to expand your literary knowledge. The great writer behind The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and Silmarillion. HarperCollins published a prose work called The Story of Kullervo today in the United Kingdom, though American listeners will have to wait until October for a U.S. release. Kullervo was Tolkien's first foray into prose and is an adaptation of a Finnish tragedy about a boy raised by an enemy tribe. Early reviews suggest the work is indeed quite dark, but according to Tolkien's own letters, the original Finnish epic that inspired the work greatly influenced his later fantasy worlds, and for that, we can be thankful. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Don't you know, we're talking about a revolution sounds. Don't you know?
Together, we can make America better. The Rick Smith Show. Progressive talk with a conscience.
While they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation.
So here's one of those interesting stories out of Denver. Evidently, the Denver airport, the city council there in Denver has blocked there was a story in the New York Daily News that said that Denver had blocked Chick-fil-A from having a store in the Denver airport. And there's been some attacks against one of the city councilmen there in Denver that are pretty nasty. I mean, I was reading some of the tweets earlier today against Councilman Paul Lopez, and it's, wow, you talk about some, and it's not people in Colorado. It's all of these insaniacs from everywhere else going, we'll come get you, Evidently, when you actually read the story and you find out what it was about, has nothing to do with Chick-fil-A's stances politically. Has everything to do with the fact that they're not open 7 days, which is something the airport wants. They have travelers that come through 7 days a week. They expect people to be open 7 days. If you've got limited space, you want to make sure, I guess this is the thinking, that there are things for people who are traveling on every day. Personally, I am a fan of taking Sundays off. Not a Christian thing, not a religious thing, not a anything, a family thing. I'm a big fan of, you know what? Maybe we should have one day that we get to see our kids. Just a thought. And have that as a kind of a national thing, like we used to, like my grandparents' generation, like before them, even back during the robber baron era, even when the Fricks and the Carnegies were slave driving. They gave Sunday off for people that if they went to church, do that, or just to not die 10 years sooner. So when you read the reality, it's about not being open 7 days. Now, I understand from some of the things that I've read that the airport is going to grant them a waiver because they are a multi-billion-dollar corporation with lots of money and lots of political leverage, and they're going to get their way one way or another. But I find it interesting that immediately when something, and this is how this is what I said was going to happen when all of the Chick-fil-A stuff started coming out in the Hobby Lobby and all of these quote unquote Christian businesses. Nothing that they do from now on can be scrutinized, because if you look at bad practices, if you look at bad working conditions, you look at poor wages, you look at any of that stuff, it's now you're being anti-Christian and you're bad. This goes against the airport's policies. And they're going to get a special exemption. That to me is, I think, discrimination the other way. Because I'm sure there are other places that would like that space as well. Maybe, here's an idea, maybe a local entrepreneur, a small business guy or girl who goes, you know what? I can put in something there. Maybe that would be a thought. What do you think? Just one of those things. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me here, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Big day. I highly suggest you go back and listen to the Cole Stanger interview as we talked about China, steel, and what may be coming. And also the Dave Jamieson interview where we talked about the huge ground shift that could be the NLRB decision. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.